In the shadows of history, there lie stories that defy explanation. Mysteries so chilling, they linger in our minds long after the answers have slipped through our fingers. What if some truths are too dark to understand? What if the questions themselves are the only thing keeping us awake at night? From unsolved disappearances to inexplicable phenomena, these are the stories that have haunted humanity for centuries. Some are forgotten, but others remain, waiting to be uncovered. So sit back, hold your breath, and let's dive into the most disturbing mysteries history has ever known. In the heart of the ancient Near East, where empires once rose and fell like the shifting sands, there existed a kingdom known for its wealth, power, and intricate diplomacy. Mitanni, a kingdom that, at its height, rivaled the might of Egypt and the Hittites, sitting at the crossroads of ancient civilizations. Yet, despite its influence, the fate of the Mitanni royal archives remains one of history's greatest enigmas. Imagine, if you will, the grand halls of Mitanni's royal palace, nestled deep in the fertile valleys of what is today northern Syria and Iraq. Inside, countless clay tablets lay upon shelves, etched with the words of kings, scribes, and diplomats. These records, some of which chronicled treaties with distant powers and detailed the kingdom's complex political machinations, represented the very heart of Mitanni's legacy. But then, something happened. Around 1340 BC, the mighty Hittite king, Suppiluliuma I, led a campaign that would forever change the region's geopolitical landscape. His military conquest was swift and decisive, and by the end of it, Mitanni, once a flourishing and powerful empire, had been reduced to a mere shadow of itself. The kingdom's capitals were taken, its armies defeated, and the once proud Mitanni royal family either exiled or destroyed. Yet, when the dust settled, something far more mysterious had vanished: the royal archives. The tablets that once chronicled the rise and fall of the Mitanni kingdom, its alliances with Egypt, and the intimate details of its internal governance were suddenly gone. Not a trace of them could be found in the aftermath of Suppiluliuma's conquest. Some have speculated that the archives were deliberately destroyed, either as a strategic act of erasure or to prevent valuable information from falling into the hands of the enemy. But the absence of these records, along with the unexplained nature of their disappearance, casts a long shadow over history. While the fate of the archives remains a mystery, it's worth considering the larger context of the time. The region was no stranger to warfare, political intrigue, and shifting alliances. The Hittites, Egyptians, and the various powers of Palestine often found themselves in delicate negotiations, with each kingdom hoping to outmaneuver the others. The loss of the Mitanni archives could very well have been part of this broader struggle for control over a land that, even then, was seen as a key to dominance in the ancient world. Yet, the mystery doesn't end there. Some historians have raised the possibility that the Mitanni archives may have been hidden, purposely concealed in a secret location, perhaps by those who foresaw the fall of the kingdom and wanted to preserve its knowledge. Could the archives have been hidden deep within the region, buried under the ruins of a forgotten palace, or sealed within a tomb that has yet to be discovered? Others point to the possibility of a deliberate cultural erasure. After all, Suppiluliuma's conquest of Mitanni wasn't merely about military domination, it was also about reshaping the historical narrative. By erasing the Mitanni archives, the Hittites could have sought to rewrite history, presenting themselves as the rightful rulers of the region, free from the influence of a now defunct rival. But the most haunting possibility is this: what if the archives were never destroyed at all? What if they were simply taken, hidden away by a mysterious third party, perhaps for reasons we cannot yet comprehend? If so, where might they be now? Could the answers lie in undiscovered archaeological sites, waiting to be unearthed by future generations of scholars? Today, The disappearance of the Mitanni royal archives remains a tantalizing puzzle. Historians, archaeologists, and curious minds alike continue to search for clues, hoping to unlock the secrets of a kingdom that once stood at the crossroads of ancient civilizations. Yet, despite decades of research and exploration, no definitive answers have emerged. So, what really happened to the Mitanni archives? Were they destroyed in the aftermath of Suppiluliuma's conquest? Or were they hidden away, lost to the sands of time and the shifting tides of history? The truth, it seems, may be buried deeper than we realize, waiting for the right moment or the right discovery to reveal itself. As we leave the windswept ruins of the Mitanni kingdom behind, we turn our gaze eastward to another ancient civilization, one that flourished long before the rise of empires like the Hittites. Here, nestled in the heart of the arid expanses of what is now modern-day India, lies the city of Dholavira, a place that, like so many ancient sites, holds the echoes of an advanced and vibrant culture. Yet, despite the sophistication of its people, the sudden abandonment of Dholavira remains one of the most puzzling mysteries of the ancient world. Imagine the scene. You are standing on the edge of a vast desert plateau, surrounded by the ruins of a once thriving city. You look out over the remnants of what was once a bustling metropolis, the streets, the drainage systems, the carefully designed reservoirs that demonstrate a civilization with an extraordinary understanding of engineering and urban planning. This was the heart of the Harappan civilization, one of the earliest urban cultures to emerge in human history, whose people lived between 3000 and 1500 BC in the vast regions that today encompass parts of Pakistan, India, and Palestine. At the center of this extraordinary network of cities stands Dholavira, a site that for centuries was thought to be little more than a footnote in history. But when archaeologists began excavating the site in the 1990s, what they uncovered sent shockwaves through our understanding of the ancient world. Dholavira, with its expertly crafted architecture, intricate water management systems, and strikingly advanced urban planning, was revealed to be one of the most important urban centers of the ancient Indus Valley civilization. Yet, despite the brilliance of its construction and the seeming prosperity of its inhabitants, the site was abandoned, suddenly and without explanation, around 1500 BC, at the height of its power. What could have caused such a sudden and mysterious collapse? The first and most obvious explanation lies in the environmental conditions of the region. Dholavira, situated on the arid island of Qadir in the vast Rann of Kutch, was reliant on the monsoon rains for its water supply. In fact, the city was designed with impressive water reservoirs and channels that suggest its builders were keenly aware of the harsh desert environment around them. It is entirely possible that a dramatic shift in climate, perhaps a prolonged drought, caused the water sources to dry up, forcing the inhabitants to leave in search of more fertile ground. But this theory, though plausible, doesn't fully explain the abruptness of the abandonment. The city's carefully planned infrastructure suggests that its inhabitants were highly resourceful and capable of adapting to environmental changes. If a drought had indeed struck, wouldn't they have found ways to mitigate the impact, perhaps by improving their water management systems or seeking other solutions, as they had done in the past? After all, the Indus Valley civilization was not unfamiliar with environmental challenges, yet it had survived for centuries. Perhaps then, the answer lies in something more mysterious. Could there have been an event, an outside force, that contributed to the sudden collapse of Dholavira? Some scholars have suggested that invasions or raids by neighboring tribes could have been a factor. However, there is little evidence of violent conflict at the site, and the remains of the city show no signs of destruction by warfare. Instead, the ruins are eerily silent. No signs of sudden destruction, no mass graves, no burned buildings. Could it be that the inhabitants of Dholavira left not because they were forced to, but because they chose to? Some have speculated that a shift in trade routes or a shift in regional power dynamics may have made Dholavira less central to the Indus Valley civilization's economy. The city's decline could have been a consequence of shifting priorities, its people moving away to seek opportunities elsewhere as the landscape of the ancient world shifted. Even more intriguing is the possibility that the inhabitants of Dholavira may have disappeared, not through any natural disaster or invasion, but as part of an intentional exodus. Could they have left the city voluntarily, abandoning it in a deliberate effort to escape some unknown threat? This idea is supported by the fact that the city's structures, including the water management systems, were left largely intact, suggesting that the inhabitants left without the chaos of a sudden departure. But if the people of Dholavira did indeed leave in search of something, perhaps a new land or a new beginning, what could have driven them to abandon such a well-organized and advanced urban center? Was it a spiritual or ideological shift that prompted them to leave, perhaps in response to a mysterious event or the arrival of new religious or cultural beliefs? The answers to these questions remain elusive, leaving us with more theories than facts. Archaeologists continue to probe the ruins, uncovering new artifacts and clues that might shed light on the mystery. Yet, despite the wealth of knowledge uncovered, no definitive answer has been found. Could the fall of Dholavira have been a natural disaster, such as an earthquake or a sudden and catastrophic flooding of the reservoirs? Some theorists believe that the city's complex water systems might have been a victim of their own design, vulnerable to the shifting conditions of the landscape. Others suggest that the civilization's downfall could be linked to the increasing pressure of changing ecological and climatic conditions, perhaps linked to the broader decline of the Indus Valley civilization as a whole. As we stand before the remnants of this once great city, we are left with more questions than answers. What caused the people of Dholavira to abandon their home, leaving behind a masterpiece of urban engineering and design? Was it a slow decline, or a sudden and catastrophic event that forced them to flee? In the end, the fate of Dholavira remains one of the most profound mysteries of the ancient world. The answers, it seems, are still out there, buried beneath the sands and stones of an ancient city long forgotten. As we move westward, the echoes of history take us to the heart of one of the most brutal empires the world has ever known, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a civilization that, through sheer force, once dominated vast swaths of the ancient Near East. But even the most powerful empires must fall, and it is in the final days of one of Assyria's most enigmatic kings, Sin-shar-ishkun, that we find a chilling mystery, a disappearance that has puzzled scholars and historians for centuries. Imagine yourself standing at the gates of Nineveh, the capital of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, as the sun begins to set over its grand walls. Once, this city was the beating heart of Assyria, its palaces adorned with intricate carvings, its ziggurats towering above the landscape. The Assyrians, with their fierce military prowess and ruthless leadership, had built an empire that seemed invincible. But now, Nineveh lay on the precipice of ruin. By 612 BC, Nineveh was surrounded by a coalition of forces, Babylonians, Medes, and other vassal states, all united in their desire to bring down the mighty Assyrians. It was during this tumultuous period that Sin-shar-ishkun, the last king of Nineveh, would face his final, tragic years. Though the Assyrians had long been known for their ruthless tactics, Sin-shar-ishkun's reign was marked by an unsettling silence. His name appears on very few inscriptions, and his actions are nearly impossible to trace in the final years of his rule. The city he had inherited, a jewel of the ancient world, was now being devoured by the fires of war. But what happened to the king himself during this time? How did he meet his end? We know, from the records that survive, that Sin-shar-ishkun did not die in battle. At least, there are no accounts of his heroic last stand, as one might expect of a king whose empire was crumbling. Instead, it is said that he vanished. His fate remains shrouded in mystery. No definitive records exist detailing his final days, and the absence of his name on surviving Assyrian inscriptions only deepens the mystery surrounding his demise. One prevailing theory is that Sin-shar-ishkun may have fled the city, retreating into the hinterlands or seeking refuge with loyal supporters. Given the scale of Nineveh's siege, it's possible he was one of the many to seek survival outside the city walls. But why did his disappearance go unrecorded in the annals of Assyrian history? Was it shame? A loss of authority so profound that his subjects refused to record his fate? Or perhaps, was it a deliberate effort to erase his presence from history altogether? Some historians speculate that Sin-shar-ishkun may have been captured by the forces besieging Nineveh. However, we find no evidence of a royal prisoner taken in the Assyrian archives, a surprising absence considering the Assyrian propensity to document such humiliations. Could it be that his captors chose to leave no record of his capture, as an attempt to erase the king's legacy from the historical record entirely? Or was his death something far more mysterious, a fate perhaps too troubling to record? Other theories suggest a more tragic end. Could Sin-shar-ishkun have met his end not in battle, but within the very walls of Nineveh itself? In the chaos of the city's collapse, with its walls crumbling under the pressure of the siege, it's possible the king could have died of something more insidious, disease, or even suicide. There are records of other kings facing ignominious deaths under the pressure of defeat, and perhaps Sin-shar-ishkun's last days were lost to the desperate turmoil of a city under siege, consumed by the chaos and destruction. Yet, there are some who suggest a far more speculative possibility. Could Sin-shar-ishkun have orchestrated his own disappearance as a strategic move, perhaps in an effort to preserve the Assyrian crown for a successor, or even to escape into the anonymity of exile, allowing for the possibility of his return? The idea of a king vanishing in the midst of disaster is not as unusual as it might seem. In the shadow of certain death, some rulers throughout history have chosen to flee into the unknown, abandoning their city or people to safeguard their future. However, the question remains, why, in a civilization so obsessed with recording every detail of military conquest, political victory, and royal lineage, did Sin-shar-ishkun's disappearance leave no trace? When the final blow came for Nineveh in 612 BC, the city was looted and burned. Its walls were breached, its palaces destroyed, and its once proud people scattered. But no matter how many inscriptions have been uncovered, or how many cuneiform tablets have been read, the true fate of Sin-shar-ishkun, the king who watched it all unfold, remains a mystery. Was his disappearance a reflection of the collapse of the Assyrian state? A symptom of a crumbling empire where even the king's identity could be lost to time? Or was it a deliberate erasure carried out by the very forces that brought Nineveh to its knees? We are left with only fragments of the truth, clues scattered across the desert, waiting to be uncovered, but never fully understood. Did Sin-shar-ishkun perish within Nineveh's walls, his body lost to the flames? Did he vanish into the night, slipping through the cracks of history like so many other forgotten kings? Or is there something more hidden in the ruins, a story yet to be discovered, a truth that remains obscured by time? As we leave behind the crumbling ruins of Nineveh and the enigmatic fate of its last king, we move further west, into the ancient heart of Anatolia, to the land of the Arzawa kingdom, a region known for its rugged landscapes and rich history, where the echoes of once powerful royal families now lie silent beneath the dust of time. In the 13th century BC, the Arzawa kingdom, a formidable force in the western Anatolian region, stood as one of the principal rivals to the mighty Hittite Empire. Their capital, Apasa, was a city of great power, brimming with wealth, and home to an aristocratic society. The Arzawans had long been a thorn in the side of the Hittites, their rulers often locked in conflict with the Hittite kings over territorial control and political dominance. But despite this fierce rivalry, the fate of the Arzawan royal family remains one of history's greatest mysteries. In the wake of Hittite king Mursili II's successful campaigns, including the annexation of Arzawa in the late 13th century BC, the Arzawan rulers seemed to disappear as suddenly as they had appeared. No more inscriptions, no more royal records, and no more royal tombs. The last known trace of the Arzawan dynasty evaporates into the annals of history, leaving only questions. It is here, in the wake of conquest, that we begin our investigation into one of the most perplexing disappearances of antiquity. Imagine walking along the quiet hills near the ruins of Apasa, the former Arzawan capital. The ancient city, now nothing more than a scattering of broken stones and weathered foundations, once boasted a complex network of palaces, temples, and citadels. What remains today is a shadow of the kingdom's former glory. As the wind whispers through the ruins, it is easy to imagine the bustling life that once filled this now desolate place. The merchants, the noble families, the soldiers all going about their lives under the rule of an ancient royal family. But where did they go? And more importantly, why did they vanish so completely? When the Hittites finally overcame the Arzawa kingdom, it seemed like a typical act of imperial expansion. The Hittites had already annexed several neighboring regions, but there was something different about the fall of Arzawa. Unlike other territories that were assimilated into the Hittite Empire, the Arzawan royal family disappeared entirely from the historical record. There are no surviving inscriptions mentioning their fate, no royal burial sites uncovered, and no indication of how their reign ended. The Hittite records themselves offer no concrete answers. Mursili II, in his annals, briefly mentions the fall of Arzawa, but only in the context of his military victory. After the annexation, it is as if the Arzawan rulers ceased to exist. There is no mention of their deaths or captivity, no indication of their subsequent treatment by the Hittites. They were erased, seemingly without a trace. But could the disappearance have been deliberate? One of the more intriguing theories suggests that the Arzawan royal family may have been entirely exterminated. In the ancient world, it was not uncommon for the victors to wipe out entire dynasties, particularly when they posed a significant threat to their power. The Hittites, who had suffered from repeated Arzawan uprisings, may have viewed the complete annihilation of the Arzawan rulers as a way to prevent any future rebellions or claims to the throne. Could it be that Mursili II or his successors went to extreme lengths to eliminate all traces of the Arzawan line? The lack of royal tombs has led some to speculate that the Arzawan royals may have been buried in secret, or even disposed of in a way that would prevent their identification, their legacy obliterated in a way that no rival kingdom could claim it. Were they executed and their bodies cast aside, or perhaps hidden away, their remains lost to history? Alternatively, another theory suggests a far more mysterious fate. Perhaps the Arzawan royal family was not killed, but taken as prisoners and exiled. The Hittite Empire was known to sometimes absorb defeated rulers into their ranks, either placing them under house arrest or even installing them as vassal kings in distant regions. It is conceivable that the Arzawan royal family was either given a nominal position in the Hittite court or quietly removed to some far corner of the empire. Their disappearance recorded neither in Arzawan nor Hittite records, an attempt to erase their existence from the historical narrative. But this idea too is shrouded in uncertainty. If the Arzawan rulers had been exiled or absorbed, wouldn't there be some record of their existence in the Hittite archives? Surely such a significant act, the inclusion of a once powerful family into the ranks of the empire, would not have gone unnoticed. Then there is the possibility that the Arzawan dynasty voluntarily abdicated, possibly fleeing the destruction of their kingdom, leaving Apasa behind in search of refuge. Some theorists argue that the family may have escaped westward, perhaps seeking sanctuary in the mountainous regions of the Aegean or along the coasts of Palestine. The Aegean world, with its increasingly complex trade routes and growing influence, could have offered a safe haven for a royal family seeking anonymity. But if they fled, why did they leave no records of their escape? Why didn't they leave a sign of their intentions, a message to future generations? One of the most unsettling possibilities, however, is that the Arzawan royal family might have simply disappeared into the folds of time, forgotten not just by their conquerors, but by history itself. In the sweeping tides of ancient conquest, there are moments when the lives of entire dynasties are swallowed up in silence, their names forgotten, their legacies erased. Could the Arzawans be victims of such a fate? Their disappearance a mere footnote in the grand tapestry of ancient empires? As the final remnants of the Arzawan dynasty fade from view, we are left with more questions than answers. What happened to the Arzawan royal family after the fall of Apasa? Were they destroyed, exiled, or did they simply vanish without a trace? Did their disappearance represent the final collapse of their civilization? Or was it an act of strategic self-preservation? As we shift our focus from the crumbling remnants of Arzawa and the mysteriously vanished royal family, we now turn to another enigmatic place, far to the west, Spina, an ancient port city once nestled in the heart of the Etruscan world. Situated at the mouth of the Po River in what is now northern Italy, Spina flourished as a vital trade hub around the 6th and 5th centuries BC, linking the Mediterranean to the northern tribes of Gaul and the distant reaches of the Celtic world. It was a city of remarkable sophistication, brimming with commerce, cultural exchange, and influence. Spina was not only a gateway for Etruscan traders, but also a hub for a range of goods, from Greek pottery and luxury textiles to amber and furs. The Etruscans, known for their advanced society, had built a port capable of supporting expansive trade routes, and their trade records were, until one fateful moment, thorough and meticulously documented. Yet, just as Spina appeared to be at the height of its power, something strange and unexplained happened. The vibrant trade records, the meticulous lists of imports and exports, and the inscriptions that once filled the archives of the city suddenly ceased. Imagine standing at the edge of what remains of Spina's port, now a quiet stretch of wetlands. The ruins that remain speak of a bustling, prosperous center of trade, with the echoes of merchant vessels from distant lands still faintly reverberating through the silence. The city itself was a crossroads of cultures, where Etruscans, Greeks, and even people from Palestine mingled and exchanged not just goods, but ideas. But as the centuries passed, something happened. A series of Etruscan cities, including Spina, began to lose their luster, and in the case of Spina, an entire aspect of its life, its trade records, vanished without explanation. The records of Spina's trade were once numerous. Archaeologists have uncovered numerous inscriptions and tablets, many detailing shipments of Greek wine, pottery, olive oil, and grain. These documents provide a clear picture of the economic life of the city. But there's a noticeable and unnerving gap that follows. Inscriptions once so detailed become sparse, and then they stop altogether. There is no clear reason for this silence, and the exact moment when the city's records fell silent remains one of the great mysteries of ancient history. So, what happened? The first and most straightforward explanation suggests that Spina, like many other ancient cities, fell victim to the tides of time. Perhaps a slow decline in trade or a shift in political power led to a loss of interest in maintaining detailed records. Trade routes may have shifted, or new powers may have risen, rendering Spina less relevant in the economic landscape of the Mediterranean. However, This theory doesn't account for the suddenness of the disappearance. It was not a gradual fading of records, but an abrupt silence that followed. Cities can lose their economic importance over time, but is it likely that a thriving port city would simply cease to record its transactions overnight? Some scholars suggest a more catastrophic cause. Could the silence of Spina's records be the result of a sudden event, a siege, a natural disaster, or perhaps even an internal collapse of its political or economic structure? Given the strategic importance of the Po River Delta, it's possible that the city was attacked by a neighboring power, either Greek or Celtic, who sought to dominate the region's trade. If this were the case, it would explain why the record stopped. Perhaps the city was sacked, its archives destroyed, and its traders driven away. However, no definitive evidence of such a catastrophic event has been found. Archaeologists have uncovered layers of occupation, but there are no signs of widespread destruction in Spina that would explain the abrupt end to its commercial record-keeping. What if the answer lies deeper, in the social and cultural fabric of the Etruscan world itself? It's known that the Etruscans were not a monolithic society, but one marked by various city-states and shifting political alliances. Could Spina have been caught in the crossfire of a larger internal struggle within the Etruscan League? As political dynamics shifted in the Etruscan world, it's possible that the city lost its autonomy and was either absorbed by a more powerful neighbor or was left to decline quietly. In this case, the trade records might have been deliberately abandoned or suppressed to maintain secrecy over the political changes occurring in the city. But there is another, more speculative theory, one that touches on the very nature of historical records themselves. Could the Etruscan elite have intentionally erased the city's trade records? The Etruscans were known for their complex religious and political systems, which sometimes veiled their actions in secrecy. If the elites in Spina had been facing external threats, it's possible that they chose to conceal their economic activities to prevent their enemies from gaining an advantage. The sudden disappearance of trade records could have been a strategic move, an attempt to obscure the true wealth and resources of the city from invading powers or rival states. Or could it be that the reason for the silence is something even stranger, something outside the realm of mere political collapse or economic shifts? Could the silence of Spina's records be a result of something more profound, a cultural or religious shift within the city itself? The Etruscans, after all, were deeply religious, and their practices were closely tied to their understanding of fate and the divine. Perhaps the cessation of trade records marks a symbolic moment in the life of the city, a spiritual crisis, or even a prophetic vision that led the ruling class to abandon the recording of commerce altogether in search of something more transcendent. Yet the absence of these records still leaves us with a great mystery. Why did Spina, a city that had once been a shining example of Etruscan wealth and power, suddenly fall silent? Was it the victim of external forces, internal collapse, or an intentional erasure? Was the silence a sign of the city's final decline, or did it represent something far more enigmatic, something that has yet to be uncovered beneath the earth of northern Italy? As we look out across the serene waters of the Po Delta, it's impossible not to wonder about the stories that have been lost to time. The once thriving city of Spina stands in silence, its trade routes forgotten, its people vanished into the dust of history. And the question remains, what happened to the city's records? And what else might still be buried beneath the ruins, waiting for the right moment to reveal its secrets? As we leave the quiet remnants of Spina behind, our journey takes us to one of the most iconic and mysterious sites in ancient history, the city of Troy, located in what is now modern-day Turkey. Known to many through the tales of Homer and the epic Iliad, Troy has long captivated the imagination. It is a city wrapped in myth, where gods and heroes clashed, and where the fates of nations were sealed by the power of war and destiny. Yet, beyond the legends, there lies a deeper, more unsettling mystery. The destruction of Troy, 7b, the final phase of the city's occupation, whose end is marked by a violent, inexplicable ruin. Imagine standing at the site of Troy today. The wind whispers through the ancient walls, once proud and towering, now crumbling into time. Before you stretches the great mound of earth and stone known as Hisarlik, where the ruins of Troy's many layers of civilization have been uncovered. The scene is one of eerie quietude, with no sign of life except the occasional rustle of birds or the distant hum of modern civilization. Yet beneath this serene exterior lies a history of destruction, conflict, and unsolved questions. The destruction of Troy is famously associated with the Trojan War, where a coalition of Greek forces led by Agamemnon laid siege to the city for 10 long years, ultimately breaching its walls with the deception of the wooden horse. However, the archaeological evidence suggests a different narrative, one that challenges the traditional view and raises more unsettling questions. The Trojan city of Troy, 7b, the final phase of settlement on the site, was a thriving, fortified city. It stood at the height of its power in the mid-12th century BC, its walls thick and robust, designed to withstand prolonged sieges. This version of Troy, however, would not meet a graceful or easily explainable end. Its destruction, as uncovered by archaeologists, shows no signs of a full-scale invasion, no great armies breaching its gates, and no overwhelming enemy force. Instead, what was uncovered was a city that had been subjected to a sudden, violent assault, marked by fire, collapse, and abandonment. When the site of Troy 7b was first excavated, the evidence seemed straightforward. Massive destruction layers, thick with charred debris and collapsed structures. The city's buildings had been razed, and much of the architectural splendor had been reduced to rubble. But unlike other ancient cities destroyed by invading armies, Troy's destruction didn't leave behind a clear enemy force. There were no foreign weapons, no invaders' inscriptions, and no signs of a distinct, organized military campaign. The destruction seemed sudden and unprovoked, as though the city had simply been wiped off the map, without a clear explanation for why or by whom. How can we explain this sudden collapse? Some historians and archaeologists suggest that Troy 7b could have fallen due to internal conflict or civil unrest. The Trojans were known to have complex political structures, and it's possible that a shift in power or a rebellion within the city contributed to its destruction. Perhaps a faction within Troy, facing internal strife, chose to abandon their city or destroy it to prevent a foreign takeover. Yet, no conclusive evidence of such internal warfare has been found in the archaeological record. Could a city of Troy's magnitude have fallen victim to internal politics without leaving behind any trace of the conflict? Another theory suggests that Troy could have been destroyed by a natural disaster, an earthquake, for instance. The region surrounding Troy is seismically active, and there is evidence that ancient Troy was built on a fault line. The force of an earthquake could easily account for the collapse of its buildings and the fire that consumed much of the city. But even so, the rapidity of the destruction and the complete abandonment of the city seem to point to more than just a natural disaster. Why would an earthquake, in this case, lead to such a total collapse and abandonment, rather than a more gradual rebuilding process? Then there is the theory that the fall of Troy 7b might have been the result of a siege, but not one involving the well-known Greeks of Homer's tales. Could the Trojan city have been attacked by another regional power? Perhaps one of the rising kingdoms of the Aegean or Anatolia? The end of Troy 7b coincides with a period of widespread upheaval in the eastern Mediterranean, marked by the fall of many cities and civilizations in what is known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. This was a time of significant migration, conflict, and the rise of new powers, which may have led to Troy's downfall. Yet, as with many other cities of the period, no clear invader's signature is left behind. The very absence of any identifiable enemy force adds to the mystery. But what if the answer lies deeper in the realm of speculation? Could the end of Troy VIIb have been caused by a more enigmatic force, something beyond human or natural agency? Some fringe theories suggest that the destruction of Troy might have been a result of a catastrophic event, a violent storm, a flash of lightning, or even an ancient form of warfare now lost to time. Could the ancient Trojans have faced a weapon so advanced, so incomprehensible, that it left no physical trace, only destruction? While these ideas sound far-fetched, they speak to the lingering mystery of Troy's sudden and inexplicable fall. It's also worth considering the possibility that the city's destruction was part of a larger regional collapse, where multiple cities fell almost simultaneously due to the destabilization of the Mediterranean world. The 12th century BC was a time of great upheaval, where the interconnected world of trade, politics, and culture began to fracture. Could Troy's destruction have been part of a domino effect, triggered by the collapse of neighboring states or cities, which led to an unstoppable wave of violence and devastation? In the end, the mystery of Troy's fall remains unsolved. We know it was destroyed, and we know it happened quickly. But why? And at whose hands? Was it a local conflict, an invasion from afar, or something even more sinister? The absence of a clear enemy or invader has haunted historians and archaeologists for centuries. And as we stand before the ruins of Troy, with its silent walls and forgotten streets, we are left with the same question that has echoed through time: what truly happened here? As we leave behind the mystery of Troy and turn our attention to the distant shores of the Persian Gulf, we find ourselves in the land of Dilmun, a civilization that flourished during the late Bronze Age, roughly between 2000 and 1500 BC. A place of strategic importance, Dilmun was a thriving hub of trade and culture, situated on the islands that now form part of modern-day Bahrain. Known for its powerful maritime connections, Dilmun was at the crossroads of some of the ancient world's most important trade routes, linking Mesopotamia, Palestine, and the Indus Valley. But there is something unsettling about Dilmun, something that has confounded historians and archaeologists for generations: the disappearance of its administrative records. Unlike other ancient cultures whose written records have survived the ravages of time, the Dilmunite people seem to have left behind little trace of their political and economic dealings, at least after a certain point. Dilmun was an important player in the ancient world, especially for the Sumerians, who revered it as a sacred land, one mentioned in ancient texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where it was described as a paradise, rich in resources. Archaeological evidence suggests that Dilmun had a thriving urban center, complete with elaborate temples, a strong administrative network, and a sophisticated system of trade. The people of Dilmun are known to have engaged in commerce with the civilizations of Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and even those from the far reaches of Palestine. Yet, despite the wealth and power of Dilmun during its peak, the records that might have provided insight into the governance, economy, and daily life of its people have mysteriously vanished. While other ancient cities left behind rich inscriptions and records in the form of tablets, cuneiform writing, and trade documents, Dilmun's written history is strangely sparse. In the early stages of archaeological excavation in Bahrain, numerous inscriptions were uncovered, primarily from the Dilmunite period, suggesting that the city had a well-organized and structured society. However, as the centuries progressed, the number of these records began to dwindle until they seemingly stopped altogether, disappearing with no clear explanation. What happened to Dilmun's administrative records, and why is there such a dramatic gap in the historical timeline? Could the disappearance of these records be linked to the city's eventual decline, or was there a deeper, more mysterious cause? The mainstream explanation tends to focus on the gradual decline of Dilmun due to shifts in trade routes and the political instability of the region. As the trade networks that sustained Dilmun began to change, it is believed that the city may have lost its importance. With the waning of its economic power, the administrative systems could have fallen into disarray, and any written records of governance and commerce could have been abandoned or destroyed in the process. Yet, this explanation feels unsatisfactory, given the suddenness of the disappearance. If the city's decline was gradual, then why were the records erased or abandoned so abruptly? One possible explanation is that Dilmun's decline was more abrupt and violent than previously thought. Could it have suffered a military invasion, or perhaps an internal uprising, that resulted in the destruction of its archives? The Babylonians, the Sumerians, or even the Elamites, any one of these neighboring civilizations could have sacked Dilmun, erasing its records in the process. However, no evidence of such an invasion has ever been conclusively found. No military inscriptions or signs of external conflict have been discovered in the archaeological layers dating to the period of Dilmun's disappearance. Without such signs of warfare, it's difficult to argue that the city fell to a foreign invader. Perhaps the answer lies in the internal structure of Dilmun itself. Could the destruction of the records have been a result of a political purge or the collapse of the central authority? The Dilmunites were a powerful maritime people, deeply engaged in trade, but also likely vulnerable to internal divisions. Could a change in leadership or a coup have led to the deliberate eradication of administrative records? It's possible that a new regime rose to power and sought to erase the previous political structure, perhaps even destroying written evidence of past rulers in order to consolidate their own control. Yet, there are no records of such an upheaval, and the absence of clear political conflict makes this theory hard to confirm. Then there is the possibility that the disappearance of the administrative records is tied to something more mysterious, something beyond politics or warfare. Could the people of Dilmun themselves have chosen to abandon their records for reasons that remain inscrutable to us today? The Dilmunites were known to be deeply spiritual, with a culture rich in religious and ceremonial practices. Might the destruction or disappearance of their records have been a deliberate act of spiritual or religious significance? Did the rulers of Dilmun decide that the written word, especially as a record of their commercial and administrative life, was no longer necessary, perhaps even taboo? This theory suggests that the people of Dilmun, at the height of their power, may have decided to retreat into an unknown spiritual or cultural belief, leading them to erase the very systems of governance that had defined their civilization. Alternatively, could it have been an environmental cause? The region surrounding Bahrain is subject to extreme conditions, including fluctuating water levels, seasonal flooding, and the harsh desert climate. It's possible that natural forces, such as a dramatic shift in climate, a prolonged drought, or flooding, could have led to the destruction of physical records, forcing the people to abandon their cities in a hasty retreat. But if such an event occurred, why did the city not rebuild? Why was there no recovery, no effort to regain control over the lost records? Lastly, could there be an element of history that remains hidden beneath the surface? What if the disappearance of the Dilmunite records is not due to any of these practical or environmental reasons, but instead to a profound shift in how history itself is recorded? Ancient societies, even those as advanced as the Dilmunites, often had systems of recording that we no longer fully understand. Could there have been a secret or forgotten form of record-keeping that was later lost to time? Perhaps the written records we've discovered were only a fraction of a far larger and more complex system of documentation, one that we simply have not yet uncovered. As we reflect on the mystery of Dilmun, we are left with more questions than answers. The vanishing of its administrative records remains one of the most perplexing gaps in the archaeological record of the ancient world. Was it a deliberate act by the people of Dilmun, or the result of external or internal forces? Did natural disasters erase their past, or was it an act of political or spiritual significance? And what might still be hidden beneath the sands of Bahrain, waiting to reveal the true story of a civilization that has all but disappeared from history? As we leave behind the mystery of Dilmun and travel further into the ancient world, we arrive at a place steeped in both legend and mystery, the land of the Shang dynasty, located in what is now modern-day China. This was a civilization that once thrived along the banks of the Yellow River, a society rich in culture, art, and power. The Shang dynasty, which lasted from around 1600 to 1046 BC, was one of the first to leave behind a tangible record of its existence through bronze artifacts, oracle bones, and the intricate ruins of its royal capitals. Yet, despite this wealth of archaeological evidence, there is one particularly unsettling aspect of the Shang dynasty's final years: the sudden and almost complete disappearance of the last royal court's movements before the dynasty was overthrown by the Zhou. The Shang dynasty's capital at Anyang, the last of the Shang capitals, is where we can still find the remnants of their once glorious civilization: massive palace foundations, intricate tombs, and the scattered remains of ritual offerings. Here, archaeologists have uncovered some of the most important records of early Chinese civilization, including the famous oracle bones, which contain inscriptions that shed light on the politics, religion, and daily life of the Shang people. These writings, inscribed on animal bones and shells, form one of the earliest known systems of writing in human history. However, as we examine the end of the Shang dynasty, something strange and unsettling begins to emerge. We know that the Shang dynasty ended in a dramatic conquest by the Zhou dynasty in 1046 BC. Yet, despite the clear historical record of the Zhou conquest, there is a profound gap in the records of the final movements of the Shang royal court. What happened to the last rulers of the Shang? How did the final days of their reign unfold? And why are there no detailed accounts of their last moments? The final Shang rulers, particularly the last king, Zhou, whose reign is associated with the dynasty's eventual downfall, remain enigmatic figures in history. The historical records suggest that the Shang rulers became increasingly decadent, marked by cruelty and excess. The last king, known as King Zhou, is depicted in many texts as a tyrant, one whose tyranny led to the alienation of both his people and his allies. The Zhou lords, who were once vassals of the Shang, began to rebel against their overlords, culminating in a confrontation at the Battle of Muyi, where the Zhou forces decisively defeated the Shang army, leading to the fall of the dynasty. Yet, despite the clear military victory, there is an eerie silence surrounding the final movements of the Shang court. The historical record tells us of the battle and the ultimate overthrow of the Shang, but it does not provide much detail about the royal family's actions in the days leading up to the conquest. King Zhou, in particular, seems to have vanished from history in a way that is hard to explain. According to some accounts, after the fall of Anyang, the king either took his own life or was executed by the Zhou. Yet, the exact circumstances surrounding his death are shrouded in uncertainty. Some ancient texts even describe him as fleeing the city in a desperate attempt to escape his enemies, only to meet an unknown fate. No tomb has been definitively linked to King Zhou, and his final moments remain a profound mystery. Could the king have disappeared into the wilderness, evading capture by the Zhou? Or was there some other force at play, something that led to the complete absence of the Shang royal court's movements during this critical time? It's possible that the records were intentionally suppressed or erased, either by the Zhou after their conquest or even by the Shang rulers themselves. One theory suggests that the disappearance of the royal court's movements was a result of the Zhou dynasty's desire to rewrite history, to portray the Shang as cruel and oppressive, and to present their own rise to power as divinely ordained. In this view, the Zhou may have deliberately obscured the details of the Shang dynasty's final days to paint a picture of moral superiority. After all, the Zhou were keen to establish legitimacy for their new rule, and the records left behind by the defeated Shang rulers may have been conveniently destroyed or manipulated. However, this theory raises more questions than answers. If the Zhou intentionally erased or altered the historical records, why would they leave behind such a significant gap in the narrative? And why would they allow the tale of King Zhou's tyranny to survive in the first place? It seems unlikely that such a crucial moment in Chinese history could be so easily manipulated. Another possibility is that the true events of the Shang dynasty's final days were simply too horrific to record. Perhaps the Zhou forces did not merely defeat the Shang in battle. They may have committed acts of brutality that were considered too shameful to memorialize. In this case, the disappearance of the royal court's movements could have been a result of collective trauma, where the survivors of the Shang court chose to remain silent rather than document the brutal events that unfolded. Yet, as with the Zhou theory, there is no evidence to support this. No accounts of widespread violence or atrocity after the fall of Anyang. There is also the possibility that the Shang royal family simply fled the city in the face of imminent defeat. In a desperate attempt to survive, the rulers of Shang could have made an effort to relocate their court, perhaps moving toward a remote area where they hoped to regroup and stage a counterattack. But if they did flee, why did no one record their movements? Were they too scattered to form a coherent narrative? Or was there a conscious effort to suppress the knowledge of their actions? As we reflect on the mystery of the Shang dynasty's disappearance, we are left with more questions than answers. What truly happened to the final movements of the royal court before the Zhou conquest? Did the Shang rulers flee or face a violent end? Or were their final days deliberately erased from history, either by their conquerors or by their own hand? Why, in a period marked by the rise of a new dynasty and the establishment of a new power, did the final days of the Shang dynasty remain such an unsolved enigma? The answers remain hidden beneath the sands of time, and perhaps, like so many other ancient mysteries, the truth will never fully emerge. But as we stand on the threshold of history, looking out at the ruins of the Shang dynasty, we are reminded of how much still lies shrouded in the fog of the past. As we continue our exploration of history's most disturbing mysteries, we find ourselves in the heart of Mesoamerica, where the ancient Olmec civilization once thrived. The Olmec people, often regarded as the mother culture of Mesoamerica, left behind a legacy that has puzzled scholars for centuries. Among their most remarkable achievements were their colossal stone heads, massive sculptures that stand as silent witnesses to a civilization whose influence spread across centuries and regions. Yet, despite their advancements in art, architecture, and religion, the Olmec people themselves remain shrouded in mystery. None of their written records have survived, and much of their history is lost to time. One of the most perplexing aspects of the Olmec civilization is the sudden and unexplained abandonment of their most important ceremonial center, the site of La Venta. The ceremonial center at La Venta, dating back to around 900 BC, was a monumental achievement for the Olmec people, a city that served as the heart of their religious and political life. It was here, within the sprawling urban complex, that the Olmec constructed the massive stone monuments for which they are most famous. These giant basalt heads, some weighing over 40 tons, are not only impressive feats of engineering, but also rich in symbolic meaning, thought to represent the rulers or divine figures of the Olmec world. However, by around 400 BC, La Venta's ceremonial center had been abruptly abandoned. The once thriving hub of Olmec culture, with its plazas, pyramids, and monumental sculptures, was left empty, its grand structures slowly sinking into the earth. Yet, Unlike other ancient cities whose fall can be attributed to external factors like warfare, invasion, or climate catastrophe, the disappearance of Laventa remains unexplained. There are no definitive records, either from the Olmec themselves or from surrounding cultures, that offer insight into why or how the city was abandoned. One theory suggests that the abandonment of Laventa could have been due to environmental factors. Perhaps the land on which the city was built had become unsustainable for agriculture, which was the foundation of Olmec society. The region around Laventa lies within the Tabasco wetlands, an area prone to flooding. The Olmec, like many ancient civilizations, depended heavily on the land's fertility. If a shift in climate or a change in river patterns led to flooding or drought, it could have made it difficult to continue sustaining the city's population. However, this theory faces its own set of challenges. While Laventa is located in a flood-prone area, the Olmec people were highly skilled in hydraulic engineering. They built canals and drainage systems to manage the water and floodwaters. So, while a change in environmental conditions could have been a factor, it seems unlikely that it would have been the sole reason for the sudden and complete abandonment of the ceremonial center. Another theory is that the abandonment of Laventa was tied to a shift in political or religious power. The Olmec were not a monolithic society. They were likely made up of multiple decentralized city-states, with different centers of power competing for dominance. It's possible that the leadership at Laventa fell out of favor or lost its political influence, leading to the eventual abandonment of the city. But what could have caused such a rapid decline? Did a rival city-state, perhaps in a power struggle, push out the leadership of Laventa? Or was there a more profound religious or political shift within the Olmec civilization itself? Could the ceremonial center have been abandoned as a result of a loss of faith in the ruling elite or in the religious practices that defined the Olmec worldview? There is also the possibility that Laventa was abandoned due to internal social unrest. As with many ancient civilizations, it's possible that the people of the city grew disillusioned with their rulers and the structure of society. This might have led to a rebellion or uprising, forcing the elite to flee or abandon the city. Yet, there is little direct evidence of such unrest. No large-scale destruction, no signs of a violent overthrow or internal collapse. The absence of such evidence leads us back to the idea of a sudden and unexplained departure. A more fringe theory proposes that the collapse of Laventa could have been connected to external forces beyond the control of the Olmec. Could a neighboring civilization, perhaps from the Maya or other Mesoamerican cultures, have played a role in the city's downfall? While there is no direct evidence of invasion or warfare, the shifting alliances and rivalries between ancient Mesoamerican peoples could have had an impact on the Olmec. Alternatively, it is conceivable that the Olmec were simply outpaced by another rising culture, leading to a gradual but overwhelming loss of influence. As the Maya or other emerging civilizations began to exert more control over trade routes and cultural practices, the Olmec may have found themselves increasingly marginalized. However, it is also possible that the cause of the Laventa abandonment is something entirely beyond our current understanding, a factor so intricate, so deeply rooted in the cultural or spiritual fabric of the Olmec people that it remains beyond our reach. Could the Olmec have abandoned the site for reasons related to religious beliefs or astronomical cycles? Ancient civilizations often linked their movements and decisions to the cosmos, and the Olmec were no exception. The alignment of the city's structures, including its ceremonial center, may have been linked to celestial events or cycles. Perhaps the abandonment of the site coincided with a significant change in the stars or a shift in spiritual beliefs, prompting the Olmec to move their center of power elsewhere. This leads to an even more speculative possibility. Could the Olmec people have left Laventa because they felt it no longer served its divine purpose? The colossal heads at Laventa are often seen as representations of powerful leaders or divine beings. Did the site lose its significance as a sacred space, leading to a spiritual retreat? Or was the city abandoned as part of a larger cultural or religious transformation that swept through the Olmec civilization? Despite the many theories and speculations, the truth remains elusive. The abandonment of Laventa continues to be one of the most profound mysteries of the ancient world. Was it the result of environmental decline, political upheaval, internal unrest, or something altogether more mysterious? Something lost in the depths of time? The evidence is fragmentary, the explanations are varied, and the motivations of the Olmec people remain shrouded in uncertainty. As we turn our attention now to one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient Mediterranean, we find ourselves on the island of Crete, where the Minoan civilization once flourished. At its height, this society was a beacon of culture, art, and trade in the ancient world, known for its stunning palaces, intricate frescoes, and a thriving economy that spanned the seas. Yet, as remarkable as their achievements were, the Minoans left behind something even more intriguing: a mysterious script known as Linear A, which, after a brief period of use, vanished without a trace. Linear A was a writing system used primarily in the palatial period of the Minoan civilization, around 1800 to 1450 BC. Its symbols were inscribed on clay tablets, pottery, and seals, found mostly in the major Minoan cities of Knossos, Phaistos, and Mallia. Despite numerous attempts, no one has ever fully deciphered Linear A, and the language behind it remains a profound mystery. But perhaps even more perplexing than the script itself is its sudden and unexplained disappearance. By the time the Minoan civilization began its slow decline around 1450 BC, Linear A was no longer in use. Strangely, there is no clear transition to another writing system. No gradual shift, no signs of an evolving language or script that could help explain the change. Instead, almost as if overnight, the Minoans stopped using Linear A altogether, and a new script, known as Linear B, emerged, almost entirely replacing its predecessor. Linear B, unlike its predecessor, has been largely deciphered and was found to be an early form of Greek. This has led some scholars to believe that the Minoans underwent a significant cultural shift, possibly brought about by external forces, such as the arrival of Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. Yet, the abrupt end of Linear A usage is far more troubling than any simple change in language. It suggests a deeper break, one with no apparent historical continuity. One theory is that the abrupt end of Linear A could have been a result of the Mycenaean conquest of Crete around 1450 BC. The Mycenaeans, a powerful Greek-speaking people, are believed to have taken over many of the Minoan palaces and cities, bringing with them their own language and script, Linear B. According to this theory, the Minoans may have been overthrown or absorbed by the Mycenaeans, causing a cultural disruption that led to the discontinuation of Linear A. The shift to Linear B would have been a part of this process, marking the beginning of a new era in which Minoan identity and culture were gradually overshadowed by Mycenaean influence. However, this theory raises several questions. Why would the Minoans abandon their script so suddenly? If their civilization was conquered, why was there no attempt to integrate the two writing systems or evolve Linear A into something new? The complete absence of any transitional evidence suggests that the change was far more abrupt than any normal cultural or linguistic evolution. If the Minoans had been defeated or absorbed, why did they not leave behind any records of their transition or attempt to preserve their script in some form? Another possible explanation lies in the idea of internal collapse. The Minoan civilization, while highly advanced, was not immune to internal pressures. Earthquakes, which were common in the region, could have caused significant damage to Minoan infrastructure, including the palaces that housed the archives and records. The most famous of these palaces, Knossos, was devastated by a series of natural disasters around 1450 BC. Could the destruction of these palaces have led to the loss of knowledge and the disappearance of Linear A? Were there mass destructions of records and tablets, leaving no trace of the once flourishing script? It's possible that these natural disasters, combined with internal strife or even economic decline, led to the collapse of the Minoan elite, and with it, the abandonment of their written language. The Minoans, despite their advanced culture, may have lacked the infrastructure or the means to recover from such a catastrophe. But again, this theory struggles to explain why the shift was so sudden and why no attempt was made to preserve or adapt their written language. Another speculative theory suggests that the disappearance of Linear A might have been linked to a religious or cultural change. The Minoans were deeply religious, and their palaces and shrines were rich in symbolic imagery. Could the loss of Linear A have been tied to a radical shift in the Minoan religious or spiritual practices? If the Minoans underwent some kind of spiritual transformation, perhaps related to the eruption of the nearby volcano on the island of Thera, which occurred around 1600 BC and had a profound effect on the Mediterranean world, it might have led to a rejection of the old ways, including their language and script. Was the sudden abandonment of Linear A part of a larger cultural or spiritual shift, one that marked the end of an era for the Minoans? Some have even suggested that the change could have been the result of an ideological or cultural decision, an intentional move away from the past. Was the Minoan elite, in a bid to reinvent their society after a series of natural disasters and foreign invasions, purposefully abandoned their script in favor of something new and more modern? This theory, while intriguing, is difficult to prove without more concrete evidence, and it doesn't fully explain why the script was discarded so abruptly, leaving no intermediary scripts behind. Despite the many theories, the absence of definitive evidence only deepens the mystery. Was the end of Linear A a result of the Mycenaean conquest, a natural disaster, a cultural shift, or something else entirely? And why was there no gradual transition, no blending of scripts, no records left behind to explain the disappearance? The complete and sudden abandonment of one of the earliest and most enigmatic writing systems in human history continues to haunt us. What happened to the Minoans in their final years? And why did they leave behind so few traces of their once great civilization? The disappearance of Linear A remains one of the most perplexing puzzles in the history of ancient writing. As we look back on the remnants of their palaces, their frescoes, and their scripts, we are left to wonder, what truths still lie hidden beneath the ruins of Crete? As we transition into another chapter of history's most disturbing mysteries, we find ourselves on the banks of the ancient Nile River in the reign of Pharaoh Necho II. The year is approximately 600 BC, and Egypt is once again asserting itself as a dominant force in the Mediterranean world. But in the midst of Egypt's political ambitions, Necho II embarked on an extraordinary endeavor, one that has left us with little more than whispers in the sands of time. It is said that Necho II, seeking to expand Egypt's influence and prestige, launched an ambitious expedition to circumnavigate the African continent. His fleet was tasked with navigating the Red Sea, sailing south along the coast of Africa, and rounding the southern tip of the continent before returning to Egypt through the Mediterranean. According to ancient sources, particularly the Greek historian Herodotus, this expedition was the first recorded circumnavigation of Africa, an astonishing achievement, especially for its time. The idea that a fleet from Egypt could have sailed around the entire continent is nothing short of remarkable. Yet, what followed is a story that slips through the cracks of history. The expedition, under the command of Egyptian sailors, is believed to have succeeded in rounding the Cape of Good Hope at the southernmost point of Africa before returning to Egypt through the Mediterranean. However, What makes this story so elusive and enigmatic is the disappearance of the detailed records of this remarkable journey. Herodotus himself mentions that Necho's fleet made it around Africa, but only scant records survive, and there is no evidence of the detailed maps or logs that would have documented this journey. What happened to the records of this expedition? Why have they disappeared, leaving only fragmented accounts that hint at something far greater? It is important to note that Herodotus, often referred to as the father of history, was writing his accounts some 50 years after the events had taken place. His work is filled with intrigue, and while he often provides vivid descriptions, his stories are sometimes as much legend as they are history. This makes it difficult to fully trust or verify his account of Necho II's expedition. Yet, even with these uncertainties, the absence of any tangible evidence, aside from Herodotus's brief mention, raises numerous questions. Could it be that the records of this African circumnavigation were deliberately lost, suppressed, or destroyed over time? Ancient Egypt was known for its intricate record-keeping and meticulous documentation of important events. So why is there such a conspicuous absence of detailed information about one of the most daring feats in ancient exploration? Some suggest that the destruction of these records may have been linked to the political instability that plagued Egypt after Necho's death. His successors, particularly in the wake of Egypt's decline, may have been less inclined to preserve the achievements of previous pharaohs. If these records were kept in royal archives or palaces, they could have been lost during periods of internal strife or invasions. The subsequent centuries saw Egypt fall into a series of occupations and foreign rule, which may have led to the systematic destruction of certain historical documents, including those detailing Necho's expedition. Another possibility is that the journey itself was so extraordinary that it became overshadowed by other, more pressing historical events. Egypt's political struggles, the rise and fall of empires, and its encounters with other powerful civilizations could have relegated the expedition to a mere footnote in the annals of history. Perhaps the pharaohs after Necho were simply not interested in glorifying a journey that, despite its audacity, may have seemed irrelevant in the face of larger, more pressing geopolitical concerns. Yet, there are those who propose that the story of Necho's expedition might have been an intentional fabrication, or at least greatly embellished by Herodotus and other ancient historians. Could the story have been part of a political narrative designed to enhance Necho's legacy or assert Egypt's dominance over the Mediterranean and beyond? After all, Herodotus himself was writing at a time when Egypt's influence had waned significantly, and it is possible that his accounts of Egyptian accomplishments were written in a manner designed to evoke the grandeur of a past empire. Still, this theory only partially accounts for the absence of physical evidence. Even if the details of Necho's circumnavigation were exaggerated or altered, surely some record of such an extraordinary event would have survived. Why then do we have so little to show for a journey that, if true, would have been one of the greatest maritime feats of the ancient world? Some fringe theories delve even deeper, proposing that the disappearance of the records was not a simple matter of neglect, but something far more deliberate and mysterious. Could there have been forces within Egypt, priests, elites, or even foreign powers, that sought to suppress the knowledge of this expedition for reasons unknown? Perhaps the idea of circumnavigating Africa was considered too dangerous or controversial, challenging the prevailing worldview of the time. After all, such a journey would have exposed the Egyptians to vast, unknown territories, potentially disrupting established trade routes or religious doctrines. Alternatively, the lack of records may point to the very nature of the expedition itself. Could it be that the journey was far more dangerous and unpredictable than we realize? There are even theories suggesting that Necho's fleet may have met an untimely and catastrophic end, with the sailors never making it back to Egypt to document their journey. Could they have encountered hostile forces, been struck by a deadly storm, or become stranded on distant shores? If the expedition ended in disaster, it would explain why the accounts of it seem so fragmented. The absence of tangible evidence for Necho II's African circumnavigation is a paradox that continues to puzzle historians and archaeologists. While the written accounts exist, they are minimal at best, leaving us with a void of knowledge that stands in stark contrast to the grandiosity of the journey itself. What happened to the records? Why are we left with so little to go on? Perhaps the most unsettling part of this mystery is the possibility that the true story of Necho II's expedition will never be fully uncovered. The records, if they ever existed, may simply be lost to time, swallowed by the sands of Egypt, or lost in the aftermath of Egypt's tumultuous history. Or perhaps there is something more, something beyond the surface of this mystery, that we have yet to understand. As we reflect on the legacy of Necho II and his ambitious expedition, we are left to wonder, was the circumnavigation of Africa truly a monumental achievement of ancient exploration, or has it simply become another tale obscured by time, its records lost forever? What secrets remain hidden beneath the sands of history, waiting to be uncovered? As we leave the Mediterranean world behind and travel eastward, we find ourselves on the vast, windswept steppes of the Pontic-Caspian region, an expanse of grasslands stretching across modern-day Ukraine, southern Russia, and Kazakhstan. For millennia, these regions have been home to one of the most enigmatic and influential nomadic cultures of antiquity, the Scythians. Known for their mastery of horsemanship, archery, and warfare, the Scythians were a formidable force in the ancient world, shaping the political landscape of the Eurasian steppe for centuries. Yet, despite their prominence and their intricate burial rituals, one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the Scythians lies not in their rise to power, but in their sudden disappearance from the historical record, specifically the disappearance of their elite burials. The Scythians are perhaps best known today for their richly furnished kurgans, large burial mounds that dot the steppe. These mounds, which contain the remains of Scythian rulers, warriors, and elites, were often filled with magnificent treasures, gold ornaments, intricate weapons, horse gear, and even detailed depictions of the afterlife. These tombs stand as monumental evidence of Scythian culture and beliefs, offering a rare glimpse into a world that has long since faded into history. However, the sudden cessation of elite Scythian burials in certain regions is both perplexing and haunting. For centuries, the steppe region was home to grand burial sites, where kings and nobles were laid to rest in lavish, multi-chamber tombs, their final resting places adorned with treasures that spoke of their wealth and power. But then, around the 5th century BC, something strange occurred. In several parts of the steppe, particularly in the territories occupied by the early Scythian elites, these burials ceased altogether. It wasn't just a gradual decline. The elite burial sites were abruptly abandoned, leaving no evidence of what might have caused the end of this once prevalent practice. At first glance, the disappearance of these burials might seem like a natural shift in cultural practices, but the abruptness and the specific regions where it occurred raise significant questions. Why did the Scythians, whose culture revolved so much around the veneration of their dead, suddenly abandon this critical aspect of their society? Was it the result of some unforeseen disaster, a change in leadership, or something more inexplicable? The traditional explanation for this shift points to the Persian invasion of the region. By the 5th century BC, the Scythians were already in conflict with the expanding Persian Empire. Some scholars suggest that the Persian forces, under the command of Darius I, may have forced the Scythians to abandon their burial practices as a sign of submission or defeat. In this theory, the abrupt end of elite burials could represent the collapse of the old Scythian way of life, as the nomads were forced to integrate with the Persians or to abandon their traditional customs entirely. Yet, the question remains, why would the Scythians, renowned for their resilience, abandon their burial traditions so suddenly, and why in such specific regions. Another possible explanation revolves around environmental changes. The steppes, while vast and seemingly unchanging, are not immune to the forces of nature. Changes in climate, such as prolonged droughts, soil depletion, or fluctuations in the water supply, could have altered the ability of the Scythians to sustain their pastoral lifestyle. As the landscape changed, it might have become increasingly difficult to maintain the extensive burial rituals associated with elite death. This theory suggests that, as the environment became less hospitable, the Scythians might have adapted by shifting their cultural practices, including their burial traditions. However, the suddenness of the disappearance, without any visible signs of gradual decline, makes this explanation seem incomplete. Perhaps the most tantalizing theory is that the disappearance of these elite burials is tied to an internal transformation within Scythian society. The Scythians were not a monolithic culture. They were made up of various tribes and factions, each with its own customs and ways of life. Could it be that a cultural revolution took place within Scythian society, one that led to the rejection of old ways, including the veneration of the elite through elaborate burial practices? The abandonment of elite burials could represent a deliberate ideological shift, one that sought to break away from the old traditions that had long defined Scythian identity. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new era, one where the focus shifted away from individual glory and toward the collective. Yet, as compelling as this theory may be, there is still little to suggest what exactly could have driven such a profound transformation. For some, the disappearance of the Scythian elite burials could be linked to the mysterious nomadic invasions that periodically swept across the steppes. The Scythians were known for their mobility, and it's possible that new, powerful nomadic groups from the east or north displaced the older Scythian elites. These invaders may have overrun the territories where the grand kurgans once stood, leading to the abandonment of burial practices and the eventual erosion of Scythian power in the region. This theory would align with the broader historical context, where the steppe was often a crossroads for migrating peoples, each leaving their mark on the land. Yet, despite the myriad of potential explanations, none of them fully satisfy the mystery of why the elite Scythian burials disappeared so suddenly and definitively. There are no clear signs of violence, no sudden environmental catastrophe, and no tangible evidence of a complete cultural shift. It is as though the very foundation of Scythian society, its reverence for its elite and its burial practices, was abruptly and inexplicably erased. What makes this mystery even more disconcerting is the lack of any surviving records from the Scythians themselves. Unlike other ancient cultures, the Scythians left behind no written language to document their history. All we have are the remnants of their burial mounds, the weapons, jewelry, and skeletal remains that have been carefully preserved by time. These artifacts provide invaluable insight into their culture, but they also leave us with an eerie silence when it comes to understanding the final days of Scythian society. As we stand on the vast steppes, surrounded by the silent mounds of Scythian kings and warriors, we are left to wonder what happened in the years leading up to their disappearance. Did the Scythian elite simply fade into history, or was there something more, something darker, at play? The mystery of the lost Scythian burials invites us to ask how a civilization that once thrived could suddenly fall into obscurity, leaving no trace of its most sacred traditions behind. Was it the result of an external force, an environmental shift, or a deep internal change? Or perhaps something more profound and unseen altered the course of their culture forever? These are the questions that remain, unanswered and shrouded in mystery, as we continue to explore the hidden corners of history's most disturbing enigmas. As we venture into the heart of the ancient Hittite Empire, we find ourselves at the ruins of Hattusa, once the magnificent capital of this powerful civilization. Nestled in the rugged highlands of central Anatolia, In what is now modern-day Turkey, Hattusa was a city of grandeur and complexity, its walls and gates echoing the strength of an empire that once dominated the Near East. Yet, beneath the monumental structures, the intricate carvings, and the well-organized streets, there lies a mystery that has intrigued archaeologists and historians for centuries: the collapse of Hattusa's sophisticated water systems. Hattusa, like many ancient cities, relied heavily on its water supply for both domestic use and its growing agricultural needs. The Hittites were known for their engineering marvels, and their city's water systems were among the most advanced of their time. A network of aqueducts, cisterns, and wells brought water from distant sources, while a series of underground channels distributed it throughout the city. This complex system was a testament to Hittite ingenuity, designed not only to meet the needs of a bustling metropolis, but to ensure the survival of the city's inhabitants in a region where water was both precious and often scarce. However, this carefully constructed infrastructure would face an unforeseen collapse, one that may have contributed to the city's eventual fall. Evidence suggests that before Hattusa was abandoned in the 12th century BC, its once reliable water systems began to fail in dramatic and unexplained ways. The decline of the water supply has long been cited as one of the key factors in the city's collapse, yet the reasons behind this collapse remain shrouded in mystery. The first signs of trouble began with the construction of new sections of the city. Archaeologists have uncovered remains of aqueducts and channels that were built with remarkable skill, yet some of these structures show signs of neglect, damage, and, in some cases, complete abandonment. Large cisterns that once stored water for the city's inhabitants were found sealed or left to decay, with no apparent reason for their disuse. The city's advanced system of underground tunnels, which had previously allowed water to flow easily across the city, showed signs of blockage and disrepair. How could a civilization so skilled in engineering allow its most vital systems to deteriorate? There are, of course, the more conventional explanations. Many historians point to the disruptions caused by internal conflict within the Hittite Empire. The Hittites were embroiled in political struggles, and these tensions may have left the city vulnerable. The collapse of Hattusa coincides with a period of upheaval across the Near East, as various civilizations were destabilized by invasions, economic crises, and internal strife. It is possible that, in the face of such turmoil, resources were diverted away from maintaining the water systems, leading to their gradual failure. Others suggest that the decline of the water systems was the result of external forces. The Hittite Empire was under constant threat from invading groups, and some scholars have theorized that these incursions may have disrupted the infrastructure of the city, including its water supply. The Sea Peoples, who are often credited with contributing to the widespread collapse of ancient civilizations during the 12th century BC, might have played a role in this. Could an invading force have destroyed or sabotaged Hattusa's water systems, weakening the city's ability to survive? Yet, despite these possible explanations, the fact remains that the collapse of Hattusa's water systems is not fully understood. The city's strategic location, high up in the mountains, would have made it less vulnerable to many of the environmental challenges faced by other cities. In fact, its water supply, carefully designed to draw from distant springs, was resilient enough to withstand many challenges. So why did this system suddenly fall apart in such a short period of time? Some researchers have begun to speculate that the decline of the water systems was linked to environmental factors, perhaps related to a changing climate. The region around Hattusa has experienced fluctuations in its climate, and it is possible that a shift in weather patterns, such as a prolonged drought, could have disrupted the water sources that fed the city's aqueducts. Evidence from other parts of the world suggests that the late Bronze Age was a period of climatic instability, with droughts and irregular rainfall affecting many civilizations. Could a sudden and prolonged change in the climate have been the hidden force behind the collapse of Hattusa's water systems? Was the city simply unable to adapt to an environmental shift that it could not foresee or control? Another theory points to the possibility of an overexploitation of resources. The Hittites, like many ancient civilizations, were skilled at maximizing the potential of their natural environment. But in doing so, they may have pushed the limits of their resources. Water, after all, is not an infinite commodity, and the demands of a growing city could have placed too much strain on the surrounding environment. The overuse of water sources, combined with the difficulty of maintaining a complex system of aqueducts and cisterns, might have led to their collapse. Was the city's rapid expansion and increased demand for water ultimately its downfall? Then there is the more unsettling possibility that the decline of Hattusa's water systems was the result of deliberate action. The Hittites were no strangers to warfare, and the collapse of their water infrastructure could have been the result of sabotage or strategic targeting during times of conflict. In the chaos of internal strife or external invasion, it is conceivable that key water supply lines could have been intentionally severed to cripple the city. If the city's enemies, or even dissidents within, targeted its water infrastructure, the effects would have been devastating. Could this deliberate act of destruction have hastened the end of Hattusa as a thriving metropolis? Of course, some still argue that the failure of the water systems is not the sole reason for the collapse of Hattusa. Other factors, such as political fragmentation, military defeats, and economic decline, may have played a role in the city's eventual abandonment. But what is particularly intriguing about the collapse of the water systems is how it fits into a broader pattern of decline. When a civilization's most essential infrastructure begins to fail, when the very systems that sustain life are no longer functioning, it often signals the beginning of the end. As we stand among the ruins of Hattusa, its once imposing gates now silent, we cannot help but wonder what the full story is. What truly led to the sudden abandonment of such a great city? And why did its water systems fail in such a mysterious and unexplained manner? Was it environmental change, internal conflict, or perhaps a deliberate act of sabotage? Or was there something else, something beyond our current understanding, that brought the downfall of this once great civilization? Perhaps the answers lie buried beneath the ruins of the city itself, waiting to be discovered by future archaeologists. Or perhaps, as with many of history's greatest mysteries, we will never fully understand what happened to Hattusa. What we do know, however, is that the collapse of its water systems remains one of the most disturbing and enigmatic episodes in the history of the ancient world, a puzzle that continues to defy explanation and invites us to wonder, what secrets are still hidden in the sands of time? As we turn our focus to the distant lands of the ancient Near East, we find ourselves in the rugged mountains of Ararat, a region that today spans across modern-day Turkey, Armenia, and Iran. Here, nestled between the fertile plains and snow-capped peaks, once stood the mighty kingdom of Urartu. The Urartians, often regarded as the ancestors of modern-day Armenians, were a powerful civilization that flourished between the 9th and 6th centuries BC. Known for their impressive fortresses, advanced metallurgy, and the construction of monumental irrigation systems, the Urartians were a force to be reckoned with in the ancient world. Yet, despite their prowess, something mysterious happened during the final years of their kingdom, a disappearance of one of the most important aspects of their society: royal correspondence. Urartu's royal correspondence was not just a form of communication, it was a vital record of the kingdom's diplomacy, military strategy, and internal governance. The letters were written on clay tablets and inscribed with cuneiform or Urartian script, offering a rare glimpse into the inner workings of this enigmatic civilization. These tablets, once found in the royal archives of the capital city of Tushpa, modern-day Van, revealed the kingdom's relations with neighboring empires, alliances, and rivalries. The correspondence also contained orders, decrees, and reports from military campaigns, painting a detailed picture of life within the Urartian state. But then, In a relatively short period of time, around the late 8th to early 7th centuries BC, the flow of these royal records abruptly stopped. The Urartian archives, which had been full of communication between the king and his governors, generals, and diplomats, suddenly became silent. The cause of this vanishing act remains one of the most unsettling and perplexing mysteries of the ancient world. The prevailing theory connects this disappearance to the mounting pressure from the expanding Assyrian Empire. By the late 8th century BC, Assyria, under the rule of Tiglath-Pileser III and later Sargon II, was in the midst of its imperial expansion. The Assyrians were known for their brutal military tactics, their ability to conquer vast territories, and their relentless pursuit of tribute from neighboring kingdoms. For Urartu, situated at the crossroads of Anatolia and the Caucasus, the Assyrians posed a formidable threat. Relations between the two kingdoms were tense, marked by border skirmishes and power struggles. It is believed that the Urartians, who had once been able to resist Assyrian encroachment, found themselves increasingly pressured by the might of the Assyrian army. This pressure may have had far-reaching consequences for Urartu's political and administrative systems. As the Assyrians tightened their grip on the region, Urartu's royal correspondence began to dwindle. Letters from the Urartian kings to their governors and military commanders become less frequent, and the detailed records of their dealings with foreign powers fade from the archaeological record. This shift is particularly curious, considering how crucial these documents had been in maintaining the kingdom's operations. Why would such an essential aspect of governance suddenly cease? One possible explanation is that the collapse of the Urartian royal correspondence was a result of the collapse of Urartu itself. The Assyrian expansion was relentless, and by the early 7th century BC, the kingdom of Urartu was in decline. It was eventually invaded and conquered by the Assyrians in 615 BC, bringing an end to its reign. In this light, the disappearance of the royal records might be seen as a sign of a kingdom under siege, where communication became increasingly difficult or irrelevant. The royal scribes, perhaps fleeing the advancing Assyrian forces, may have simply abandoned their work, leaving behind empty archives and unfinished records. Yet, this explanation does not fully account for the complete and abrupt disappearance of the correspondence. The Urartians were no strangers to warfare and political upheaval. They had endured previous assaults and had, at times, been able to rally and restore their power. So, what made the collapse of their archival system so sudden and absolute? Could it be that there was something more involved than just military defeat? Another theory suggests that the silence of the royal correspondence could have been caused by a change in the internal structure of Urartian society. The kingdom was ruled by a powerful elite, with the king at the top, but there were also powerful regional governors and military leaders who wielded significant influence. It is possible that internal power struggles or a breakdown in central authority led to the cessation of communication. If the royal court lost control of its communication channels, the records could have been lost or deliberately destroyed by those seeking to weaken the king's authority. In this scenario, the disappearance of the correspondence might reflect a collapse not only of the external political order, but of the internal cohesion that had once held the kingdom together. But there is another, more speculative theory that invites us to consider the role of foreign influence in the disappearance of the royal letters. Could it be that the Urartians were influenced, or even coerced, into abandoning their written records by external powers other than the Assyrians? Some historians have suggested that the Urartian kings, realizing the imminent threat posed by Assyria, may have sought alliances with other powers in the region, such as the Cimmerians or even the Phrygians. These external forces could have imposed a kind of strategic silence, encouraging the Urartians to abandon their correspondence as a way of masking their vulnerabilities and preventing their enemies from gaining insight into their internal affairs. Was the disappearance of the royal correspondence, in this case, an act of concealment, a tactical move to throw off the Assyrians or their allies? As we explore the possibility of external influence, it's worth considering how the disappearance of these documents might fit into the broader pattern of Assyrian conquest. The Assyrians were known for their record-keeping, and they made great efforts to document the fall of their enemies. But what is truly fascinating is that despite the fact that Assyria conquered Urartu, they left remarkably little in the way of archival evidence detailing the downfall of their rival. Was this silence deliberate? Did the Assyrians intentionally erase the historical record of Urartu's royal correspondence to ensure that the kingdom's story would be forgotten? Or was it simply the result of the chaos and disintegration brought on by war? Perhaps even more perplexing is the fact that, despite the silence of the royal correspondence, the Urartian people did not simply vanish. They were absorbed into the surrounding cultures, and elements of their language, art, and culture can still be seen in later civilizations, particularly in Armenia. The loss of their royal correspondence, then, remains an eerie gap in the historical record, a cultural memory of a once great kingdom erased by the passage of time, warfare, and the political turbulence of the era. Standing among the ruins of Tushpa, with its fortress walls now crumbled and its once thriving cityscape buried beneath layers of earth, one cannot help but wonder what secrets lie beneath. Why did the Urartian royal correspondence vanish so completely? Was it the result of Assyrian conquest, internal upheaval, or something more insidious, an act of deliberate erasure? The answers remain elusive, locked away in the shadows of history, awaiting discovery. And as we delve deeper into the enigma of Urartu's final days, we are left to ponder, what hidden stories, lost to time, might still be waiting to be uncovered? The ancient city of Hazor once stood as a towering beacon of power in the Levant, commanding the crossroads of ancient trade routes and sitting at the heart of a region that was both coveted and contested. Located in what is now modern-day Palestine, Hazor was a major center of political, cultural, and military activity during the Bronze and Iron Ages. The city's massive fortifications, sprawling palaces, and imposing temples suggested a place of great wealth and influence. But the most intriguing feature of Hazor was not its architecture or its strategic importance. It was its archives. In the early excavations of Hazor, particularly those conducted by Yigael Yadin in the 1950s, archaeologists unearthed something remarkable: a cache of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script, the ancient writing system of the Near East. These tablets were not merely records of transactions or daily life. They were royal archives, offering a rare glimpse into the diplomatic and military affairs of the city. These texts, written in multiple languages, revealed correspondence between Hazor's rulers and powerful neighbors like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Canaanite city-states. The archives shed light on a civilization engaged in complex diplomacy, military alliances, and even conflict. But despite the wealth of information contained within these tablets, there is one profound and unsettling mystery that continues to linger: the sudden and unexplained destruction of Hazor's palace archives. This is a question that has perplexed historians for decades. What could have caused such a dramatic loss of invaluable records, leaving only fragments of what was once a carefully organized archive? It is not as though Hazor's archives were accidental discoveries. These texts were central to the city's governance. The records painted a picture of a city engaged in complex political maneuvering, with messages to and from distant powers that crossed cultural and linguistic boundaries. For example, the letters between the king of Hazor and the Egyptian pharaohs are among the most well-preserved, indicating both the importance of these diplomatic exchanges and the level of sophistication in Hazor's administration. Yet, despite their importance, these records were lost, almost entirely, in the wake of Hazor's destruction. What happened to them? How could a major city like Hazor, with its intricate systems of communication, lose so much? The most accepted explanation is that the destruction of Hazor's archives occurred around the same time as the city's violent end, traditionally placed in the late 13th century BC. The city was sacked and burned, with a level of destruction that suggests a military campaign of significant force. The biblical narrative, for example, records the burning of Hazor by the Israelites, as described in the book of Joshua. This catastrophic event, which aligns with both archaeological and textual evidence, likely contributed to the loss of the royal archives. The burning of the city may have led to the destruction of the tablets, leaving the evidence of Hazor's administration and international relations reduced to ash. However, there are still troubling gaps in this theory. The destruction of a city's archives in a fire is not unusual. Countless ancient records have been lost to the flames of warfare. But the swift and complete disappearance of such an extensive archive suggests that there may have been something more deliberate at play. Why were these records specifically targeted? Could the destruction of the archives have been more than just collateral damage in a battle for control? Was the act of destroying the archives itself a strategic move? One theory proposes that the destruction of the archives may have been the result of an intentional effort to erase Hazor's historical narrative. If Hazor was indeed under siege by external forces, such as the Israelites, or perhaps the Egyptians or other powers, those responsible for the city's downfall may have sought to prevent any future knowledge of its existence and influence. If Hazor was a rival to other powers, especially Egypt or nearby city-states, erasing its archives would have been an effective way of severing its historical legacy. Could the destruction of Hazor's archives have been a deliberate attempt to erase the city from history, to make its achievements and influence vanish in the wake of its physical destruction? Another possibility suggests that the archives were destroyed as a result of internal strife. While Hazor's ruling elite may have been engaged in diplomacy with foreign powers, the city's collapse could have been sparked by political instability from within. The Hittite Empire, which had once been a dominant force in the region, had begun to weaken during this time, and Hazor may have found itself at the center of factional struggles. If power had become fragmented, it is conceivable that those vying for control would have seen the archives as a threat to their legitimacy and sought to destroy them. In such a situation, destroying the records would be a means of controlling information and eliminating the possibility of rivals leveraging the past to gain influence. Still, the complete disappearance of these archives raises questions beyond the scope of mere political or military conquest. The archives were not just written records. They were symbols of power, authority, and identity. If these documents were destroyed as part of an organized campaign to erase Hazor from history, what does that say about the forces at play in the Levant during this period? And why were there no surviving copies of these records, no remnants left behind in neighboring cities or archives? The absence of these texts creates a historical vacuum that leaves us with no concrete answers, only a series of possibilities that continue to elude explanation. As we investigate the fate of Hazor's royal archives, it's important to consider the broader context of the ancient Near East. This was a time of great upheaval, when many powerful cities and empires found themselves beset by invaders and rivals. The Sea Peoples, who ravaged much of the eastern Mediterranean in the late Bronze Age, may have played a role in Hazor's fall. If the city's archives were destroyed in the wake of an invasion by these marauding groups, could the destruction have been part of a broader cultural campaign to erase the records of a defeated civilization? While the identity and motivations of the Sea Peoples remain largely mysterious, their role in the collapse of numerous ancient cities suggests that they could have been responsible for more than just the physical destruction of Hazor. They may have been attempting to erase its legacy entirely. Another theory points to the possibility of a natural disaster. Earthquakes, which were not uncommon in the region, could have caused structural damage to Hazor's archives, possibly contributing to their destruction. Could the destruction of the city and its records have been the result of a natural catastrophe that led to the collapse of its infrastructure. While there is no direct evidence linking Hazor's downfall to an earthquake, the suddenness of the city's destruction could hint at the possibility of a catastrophe that went beyond human action. Despite these theories, one cannot help but be struck by the eerie silence surrounding the disappearance of Hazor's palace archives. The city's royal correspondence, once a powerful testament to the might and reach of Hazor, is gone. What might have been learned from these records remains a tantalizing mystery, one that speaks to the fragility of human history. In the absence of answers, we are left to wonder, was Hazor's destruction a result of military conquest, internal collapse, or something more deliberate? What might we still be missing from this lost city's past? And perhaps, most hauntingly, what other ancient archives, silent and forgotten, might be waiting to reveal their secrets, buried beneath the rubble of time? As we turn our focus to the early history of Macedonia, we find ourselves drawn into one of the most perplexing gaps in the royal history of the ancient world: the disappearance of records documenting the royal burials preceding Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great. These vanished records are of significant importance, as they would not only have chronicled the origins and customs of one of history's most iconic dynasties, but also provided insight into the rise of a power that would reshape the course of Western civilization. And yet, despite the Macedonian dynasty's prominence and the considerable archaeological wealth we have unearthed from the region, these royal burial records remain largely absent. The burial sites of early Macedonian kings were of great cultural significance, serving as both repositories for the remains of rulers and as symbols of the city's power and religious identity. At the heart of this mystery lies the ancient city of Aigi, modern-day Vergina, the capital of ancient Macedonia and the first royal seat of the Argead dynasty. This is where, as early as the 8th century BC, Macedonian kings were buried with lavish and detailed funeral rites. The tombs unearthed here, including the famous tomb of Philip II, reveal the immense wealth and artistry of the Macedonian court. Intricate jewelry, fine weaponry, frescoes, and gold artifacts, everything one might expect for royalty, has been uncovered. Yet, strangely absent from these royal tombs are the records of earlier royal burials. What we do know is that burial customs in Macedonia evolved with time, and Philip II's tomb, for instance, was remarkably ornate and well documented. But before Philip's time, a gap persists in the historical record. If royal burials were indeed such an integral part of Macedonian identity and governance, why is there so little information about them? The first clues begin to emerge with the discovery of early royal tombs, dating back to the 6th century BC. The tombs at Aigi bear witness to a shift in the way the Macedonian elite viewed death and the afterlife. These burials were not just about laying the dead to rest. They were acts of political symbolism. The tombs, often with inscriptions or grave goods, reflected the power and legacy of the deceased monarch. But despite these opulent markers of royal death, there is a curious lack of detailed written records, texts that could explain the rituals, the identities of the buried rulers, and the dynastic claims they made. How could a dynasty that eventually gave rise to one of the most famous conquerors in history, the man who would stretch the boundaries of empire to the edges of the known world, have left so few traces of its early monarchs? What happened to the historical and ceremonial accounts that would have accompanied these burials? Could they have been deliberately destroyed? Or is it possible that they were never even recorded? One plausible theory is that the Macedonian royal family, perhaps eager to craft a narrative of divine legitimacy, may have intentionally erased or suppressed information about their earlier rulers in order to elevate Philip II's own claim to power. It is well documented that Philip II was a master of political maneuvering and symbolism. He reformed the Macedonian army, unified fragmented city-states, and, crucially, established a carefully curated image of himself as a sovereign chosen by the gods. By emphasizing his own reign as the moment of Macedon's true rise to greatness, the early royal lineage might have been relegated to the shadows. This would make sense given the lack of detailed historical texts about the earlier Macedonian kings, who perhaps did not have the monumental power or divine association that Philip was keen to project. However, another hypothesis takes a more speculative turn, suggesting that the absence of burial records could be connected to external pressures, an erasure of identity driven by invading forces. Macedon was often caught in the crossfire of larger geopolitical conflicts. The city-state's position between Persia, Greece, and other regional powers made it susceptible to military invasions and shifting alliances. Could the historical erasure be the result of an enemy power targeting Macedonian heritage and history? An invasion might have led to the destruction of written records, intentionally removing any trace of early royal lineages as part of a broader campaign to weaken Macedon's cultural and political foundations. Perhaps most haunting of all, however, is the possibility that the Macedonian burial records were simply lost over time. The destruction of cultural heritage is an age-old phenomenon. Records can be burned, lost in natural disasters, or simply forgotten. The very nature of ancient writing materials, often inscribed on perishable materials like clay tablets or papyrus, means that much of what was once written down has been lost to the ravages of time. Even if the early Macedonian kings did indeed leave burial records, it is entirely possible that these records were simply destroyed by the elements, never to be recovered. But why, then, do we have records of later kings? Why was Philip II's reign preserved in such meticulous detail while his predecessors remain elusive? And there's another question, one that might never be fully answered. Did the disappearance of these records have any bearing on the rise of Alexander the Great? Alexander, famously tutored by the philosopher Aristotle, would go on to create a world empire that stretched from Greece to India. Was the mysterious absence of his royal predecessors part of a broader political or cultural shift within Macedonia, a shift that laid the foundations for his own meteoric ascent? Could the silence of the early royal burial records reflect a wider struggle for identity and legitimacy in the Macedonian royal family? As we ponder these questions, we are left with a lingering sense of mystery. The story of Macedonia's early kings, the unrecorded burials and their cultural significance, is one we may never fully comprehend. What we do know is that the royal burial traditions and the written records that once accompanied them seem to have vanished, leaving us to piece together the fragments of a forgotten past. The tombs that we have discovered, with their finely crafted artifacts and magnificent displays of wealth, hint at a much grander narrative, one that remains stubbornly elusive. What did these early Macedonian royal families believe in? How did they shape the political and religious landscape of their time? And what became of the texts that could have provided us with those answers? The sudden disappearance of the early burial records remains one of the great mysteries of Macedonian history, and perhaps one of the most enigmatic gaps in the larger story of ancient civilizations. Perhaps one day more will be uncovered. But for now, we are left with unanswered questions and an eerie silence about a vanished past. As we delve deeper into the mystery of the early Macedonian royal burials, it becomes clear that the absence of written records is more than just a historical puzzle. It is a reflection of the shifting nature of power in ancient societies. The lack of detailed accounts surrounding the earlier rulers of Macedon may not only be a loss of information, but could symbolize the very foundations of Macedonian identity. It prompts us to reconsider how historical narratives are constructed and the role that power and politics play in shaping them. Was the Macedonian royal family deliberately crafting a legacy for future generations, or were they simply trying to mask the more humble origins of their dynasty? This question brings to the forefront the complexities of ancient monarchies and their reliance on both material culture and symbolic representation. Macedonian kings, particularly during the Argead dynasty, utilized monumental architecture, lavish burial practices, and striking visual symbols to solidify their authority. The grand tombs discovered at Ege may have been as much about political legitimacy as they were about securing a place in history. Through these material markers, the kings hoped to ensure that their names and deeds would endure, even if the written records themselves failed to do so. The tomb of Philip II, for instance, stands as a testament not only to his wealth and power, but also to his deliberate efforts to establish his reign as a defining moment for Macedon. In the end, the loss of the early burial records might not be as significant as the lasting impact of those rulers. What survives, the artifacts, the ruins, and the remnants of their tombs, are enough to attest to the grandeur of their reigns. While we may never fully understand the intricacies of the early Macedonian dynasties, the discoveries that continue to emerge from Ege and other sites offer a tantalizing glimpse into the world of those long-lost kings. Perhaps the key to understanding their legacy lies not in the records they left behind, but in the very silence surrounding them. This silence invites us to reflect on the ways in which history is written, remembered, and sometimes forgotten altogether. The arid landscapes of northern Afghanistan, where the ancient city of Shortugai lies, offer little more than the wind's whisper across dry earth and the shifting sands of time. It is here, in the rugged heart of the Bactrian region, that one of the greatest enigmas of the ancient world persists: the sudden abandonment of a prosperous settlement that once thrived as an outpost of the Indus Valley civilization, the enigmatic Shortugai. This site, built on the margins of the famed Oxus River, stands as an eerie reminder of a forgotten past, shrouded in mystery. Despite its relative proximity to major cultural and economic hubs of the ancient world, the reason for its swift and complete desertion remains an unanswered question. The city of Shortugai was strategically located, perched along ancient trade routes that connected the Indus Valley civilization to the larger world. The site, thought to have been a thriving trade colony, is significant for its evidence of both Indus Valley material culture and its interaction with surrounding cultures, including those from Mesopotamia and the Central Asian steppes. Excavations have uncovered unique artifacts, pottery, jewelry, seals, and tools, all pointing to the region's active role in long-distance commerce. Intriguingly, the city also bears hallmarks of the Indus Valley itself, such as its standardized brick construction and urban planning, indicating a shared cultural and architectural heritage. For all its grandeur, however, Shortugai vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, leaving no trace of a smooth transition or an obvious cause. The settlement, which flourished sometime around 2000 BC, was abandoned by 1500 BC, with no clear indication of why its inhabitants suddenly left. What happened to this once thriving center of commerce? What caused an advanced, well-integrated society to simply disappear from the historical record? One theory points to environmental factors. The Oxus River, which sustained the region's agriculture and provided a vital water source for the settlement, experienced significant shifts in its course over millennia. It is conceivable that changes in the river's flow or other natural environmental shifts could have led to the collapse of the city's agricultural base. Archaeologists have suggested that such a shift could have made the region less hospitable, forcing its inhabitants to abandon Shortugai in search of more stable resources. Yet, while this theory is plausible, it does not explain the complete and sudden abandonment of the city. In many cases, environmental changes lead to gradual population declines rather than sudden desertion. So, what drove the people of Shortugai, a society with long-standing trade networks and established infrastructural systems, to leave with such abruptness? Another intriguing possibility centers around the impact of external forces. The region was home to various nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes, many of whom had contact with the well-established Indus Valley civilization. As the region's political and economic landscape evolved, it's possible that an influx of external invaders or shifting power dynamics could have influenced the fate of Shortugai. In this case, the abandonment of the site could have been tied to a violent conquest, or perhaps to pressure from outside forces that led to the disruption of trade routes and economic stability. Yet, unlike other regions where evidence of conquest is often visible through destruction layers or signs of battle, no definitive signs of violent conflict have been found at Shortugai. This raises the question: could the abandonment have been caused by something other than military aggression? Another intriguing angle explores the possibility of a socio-political collapse. The Indus Valley civilization itself is believed to have faced a gradual decline, perhaps due to overextension, social unrest, or shifting economic structures. The abandonment of Shortugai could have been tied to these larger changes within the Indus system. If Shortugai was an outpost of a larger civilization in decline, its inhabitants might have simply abandoned their posts in response to larger cultural shifts, disbanding their cities and returning to simpler ways of life or joining other, more stable societies. Moreover, there's the possibility that the abandonment of Shortugai was due to internal dynamics within the settlement itself. Could the city's elites, who were once deeply integrated into Indus Valley trade networks, have lost their control over the city's commercial or political affairs? The collapse of leadership or a breakdown of the central authority might have driven the population to disperse, leaving the city to be reclaimed by the surrounding desert. This theory, while plausible, remains speculative. There is little evidence to support an internal coup or breakdown of political structures that would account for the disappearance. There are, of course, fringe theories, ones that venture into the realm of speculation and the unknown. Some have suggested that the city's abandonment might have been linked to a catastrophic event, a natural disaster such as an earthquake or a sudden flood. The presence of multiple layers of sediment at the site has led some to hypothesize that sudden environmental changes may have overwhelmed the settlement, forcing its inhabitants to abandon their homes and flee without leaving behind a trace of their departure. Others have proposed that the settlement may have been subjected to a plague or a disease that wiped out much of its population, leading to the collapse of the society. While these ideas remain speculative, they reflect the deep mystery surrounding Shortugai. What is perhaps most puzzling about Shortugai is not the fact that it was abandoned, but the complete lack of records or evidence indicating why. Most ancient cities that fall to environmental pressure, military conquest, or socio-political instability leave behind some trace of their downfall, be it through written records, remnants of battles, or signs of disruption. Yet Shortugai stands as an exception. The absence of these signs adds to the eerie quality of its sudden abandonment, as if the city simply faded away, swallowed by time and the desert sands. Ultimately, the mystery of Shortugai and its unexplained disappearance leaves us with more questions than answers. Was it the victim of a natural disaster, a change in climate, or an internal collapse? Or did a series of external pressures slowly erode the life from the city? Could there have been a more complex set of factors at play, one that we have yet to fully understand? As we look at the ruins of Shortugai, we are left to wonder what secrets still lie buried in the sand, secrets that, perhaps, will never be fully uncovered. What happened to the people who once called this bustling trade outpost home? And what truths about the rise and fall of ancient civilizations remain hidden beneath the shifting dunes of history? Shortugai remains one of the great, unresolved mysteries of the ancient world, its final chapter forever lost to time. As we continue to probe the mystery of Shortugai, The enigmatic disappearance of this once thriving trade hub raises broader questions about the nature of ancient civilizations and their vulnerability to unforeseen shifts. The site's rapid decline, without clear cause or explanation, serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of even the most advanced societies. It compels us to consider how environmental changes, political upheavals, and internal factors can intersect, leading to the abrupt dissolution of what once seemed like an unshakable center of commerce and culture. Could it be that Shortugai's fate mirrors that of other civilizations, which experienced flourishing followed by sudden collapse, leaving us to only guess at the precipitating factors? In a larger context, the disappearance of Shortugai speaks to a pattern observed in many ancient cities across the world. Despite the impressive cultural and material legacies they leave behind, we often find ourselves staring at the remnants of these societies, piecing together evidence in a desperate attempt to reconstruct their histories. Shortugai's abandonment, much like the fall of other ancient settlements, underscores the difficulty of maintaining societal structures over long periods, especially when faced with shifting climates, new economic systems, or outside invasions. We might never uncover the full truth, but the question remains: how many other Shortugais have slipped through the cracks of history, leaving behind only their ruins and unanswered questions? The site of Shortugai, with its intriguing mix of Indus Valley artifacts and the lack of definitive answers regarding its downfall, offers a glimpse into the complexity of ancient trade and cultural exchange. The city's strategic location and its role as an outpost between powerful civilizations highlight the interconnectedness of the ancient world, where distant cultures interacted through commerce, politics, and migration. Yet, the unanswered questions about Shortugai's fate challenge us to reconsider the precariousness of even the most interconnected societies. In the end, Shortugai may not just be a symbol of an ancient mystery, but a reminder of the fleeting nature of human civilization, always vulnerable to the forces of time, change, and unforeseen events. Nestled deep within the archives of ancient Persia, in the ruins of what was once the mighty Achaemenid Empire, lies a peculiar gap in the historical record, a gap that has left historians and archaeologists scratching their heads for centuries. Among the countless clay tablets that have survived millennia, bearing everything from royal decrees to detailed administrative accounts, there is a striking silence during the transitions between certain reigns. Specifically, the reigns of Darius I, Xerxes I, and Artaxerxes I seem to be marked by sudden and unexplained pauses in the flow of administrative tablets. These silences raise unsettling questions. Why did these records vanish at such critical junctures? And what does this hidden void tell us about the Achaemenid Empire and its inner workings? Imagine the scene. You stand in the midst of a vast archaeological site, the remnants of Persepolis surrounding you. Carved stone walls tell stories of grandiose royal ceremonies, and inscriptions celebrate military victories that shaped the ancient world. Yet, tucked away in the more obscure corners of these ruins are thousands of small, unassuming clay tablets, each one bearing inked script that once chronicled the affairs of a vast empire. The Persian Empire, at its zenith, spanned 3 continents, a vast domain from the Indus Valley to the borders of Greece, with a complex bureaucracy to match. Among these tablets, however, there is a conspicuous gap, especially during times of political transition. For example, when Darius I passed on the throne to his son Xerxes I, a sudden lapse in the number of administrative documents seems to occur. Similarly, when Xerxes I's reign ended, and his son Artaxerxes I ascended to power, a noticeable silence again appears. These gaps have been noted in various archaeological surveys and studies, yet the reason for their existence remains elusive. One might wonder, what causes such a disruption in a civilization that prided itself on meticulous record-keeping? The Achaemenid Empire was known for its complex administrative systems, which spanned across various regions, each with its own unique cultural, political, and economic landscape. The survival of tens of thousands of administrative tablets, often detailed in content, covering everything from royal decrees to tax records to inventories of goods, suggests a government that was not only efficient but relied on detailed documentation to maintain control. Yet during key moments of transition, these records seem to vanish. One theory suggests that these lapses could be the result of a shift in governance practices. Transitions of power, especially between strong rulers like Darius and Xerxes, may have prompted a re-evaluation or restructuring of the bureaucracy. It is possible that the incoming monarch, in an effort to assert his authority, deliberately destroyed or withheld previous records in order to distance himself from his predecessor's rule. This would not have been an unusual tactic in the ancient world, where succession often meant the erasure or rewriting of history to ensure a smooth transition of power. However, this hypothesis struggles to explain the sheer scope and consistency of these gaps, particularly given the immense importance of administrative continuity in the Achaemenid system. Another possibility lies in the political and military challenges faced by these rulers during their reigns. Darius I, for instance, embarked on an ambitious project to consolidate the vast territories of the Persian Empire, which included establishing strong regional governance structures. Yet his reign was not without turmoil. His campaign against the Scythians, for example, met with resistance and was less successful than expected. Could these military setbacks have disrupted the administration to the extent that record-keeping temporarily halted? Xerxes I, too, faced monumental challenges, most notably the failed invasion of Greece, which culminated in the Battle of Salamis. The devastation of his naval forces and the subsequent retreat from Greece might have led to a temporary breakdown in the administrative system, as resources and manpower were diverted toward rebuilding the empire's defenses. In both cases, it's plausible that such upheavals would have impacted the ability of local administrators to keep up with their responsibilities. However, the complete and sudden disappearance of records during these periods remains difficult to explain. Why would entire departments, perhaps even entire regions, cease to document their affairs at such pivotal moments? If these were simple disruptions due to war, why would there be no surviving evidence of administrative activity in the aftermath of these challenges? An even more intriguing, though less widely accepted theory, delves into the possible existence of a deliberate erasure, an attempt to obscure certain events or details from public record. The Achaemenid Empire, while known for its tolerance and diversity, was also a highly controlled and centralized state. A ruler might have had reasons to suppress certain information, whether it involved internal dissent, unpopular military campaigns, or even personal rivalries within the royal court. If the records were being manipulated or controlled, it could explain the sudden disappearance of documentation during moments of transition, periods in which new monarchs might have sought to purge politically sensitive information. This theory, though speculative, highlights the very human tendency to control the narrative of history, a practice not unique to the ancient world. In this case, it would have been the royal scribes, bound to the will of the monarch, who would have been tasked with shaping the written record to suit the new power structures. Yet, no conclusive evidence exists to support the idea that these gaps were a result of a deliberate act of suppression. Then there are the more fringe theories, ones that venture beyond the realm of the purely political. Some have wondered whether these unexplained silences might have something to do with a larger, less tangible force: the loss of knowledge. Could the loss of these records be a reflection of something more profound, such as the decline of literacy or the breakdown of the scribal class? This would have been a significant shift for a society that placed such emphasis on written communication. And while this theory is unlikely, the possibility of a cultural shift, or the sudden disappearance of key figures, remains tantalizingly unexplored. Another theory, perhaps the most unconventional, posits that these lapses might not be the result of human action at all, but rather a natural phenomenon. Could it be that certain tablets were simply lost to time due to environmental factors? The Persian Empire, like many ancient civilizations, faced the ravages of climate change, and a drastic shift in local weather patterns could have led to the destruction of records in specific areas. Earthquakes, floods, or even fires, natural disasters, could have wiped out entire storehouses of tablets during periods of transition, leaving behind only the faintest traces of the empire's once comprehensive records. But still, despite these speculative theories, the core mystery remains. Why was there such a noticeable gap in the documentary record during these transitions of power? And what did these silences mean for the people who lived under the rule of the Achaemenid monarchs? Were these gaps simply the result of practical disruptions, or did they reflect deeper, more unsettling aspects of the empire's complex political and social structure? As we peer deeper into the mystery of these unexplained silences, we're reminded that history, especially the history of great empires, is often a puzzle of missing pieces. Some gaps can be filled with educated guesses, others remain sealed, hidden from view, like forgotten echoes in the halls of time. And perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this mystery is that the true reasons for these silences may never be fully known. What remains undiscovered in the forgotten corners of ancient archives? What truths have been lost to time, never to be uncovered? These are questions that may never have definitive answers, leaving the silence itself as the most chilling legacy of all. As we reflect on the gaps in the historical record of the Achaemenid Empire, it becomes clear that these silences are not mere anomalies, but perhaps key pieces of a larger puzzle. The absence of administrative records during pivotal transitions of power, such as those between Darius I and Xerxes I, raises profound questions about the very nature of imperial control and governance. Could these gaps signify something more than just a bureaucratic oversight or disruption? Could they represent the deliberate erasure of inconvenient truths, political shifts, or unspoken tensions within the royal court? The absence of documentation during these periods speaks volumes, suggesting that even the most meticulously organized empires are not immune to the unpredictable forces that shape history. Ultimately, the silence in the archives of ancient Persia serves as a stark reminder that history is often incomplete, fragmented, and full of missing pieces. These silences, whether due to political intrigue, environmental factors, or the loss of knowledge, leave us with only glimpses of the true nature of ancient empires. As historians and archaeologists continue to probe the mysteries of the Achaemenid Empire, the gaps in the historical record challenge us to rethink what we know about ancient governance, power, and the fragile nature of historical memory. While the reasons behind the disappearance of these records may never be fully understood, their absence itself offers a haunting testament to the complexities and uncertainties of empire building. As we shift from the towering ruins of Persepolis to the arid deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, we uncover a mystery that has confounded historians and archaeologists for centuries: the disappearance of the Nabatean pre-Petra trade route documentation. The Nabateans, known for their mastery in navigating and controlling the lucrative trade routes that connected the East and the West, left behind a remarkable civilization marked by stunning architecture, sophisticated water systems, and an extensive network of commercial hubs. But buried within this impressive legacy is a strange gap: the sudden absence of trade records from the earlier periods, before the rise of the famous Petra. Imagine for a moment the hustle and bustle of the ancient Nabatean city of Petra, with its awe-inspiring rock-cut architecture and intricate water systems. Situated in present-day Jordan, Petra was the crowning jewel of Nabatean power and wealth. The city thrived as a center of commerce, a crossroads for traders who journeyed between Palestine, Egypt, Arabia, and beyond. But before Petra's emergence as the dominant trade hub, there were other cities and settlements that played an essential role in the Nabatean trade network. These earlier sites, along with the pre-Petra trade routes, seem to have been meticulously documented, at least based on what little evidence remains. Today, however, the earliest records of the Nabatean trade routes are almost completely absent. Scholars know that the Nabateans were heavily involved in the spice trade, transporting goods like frankincense, myrrh, and precious metals across vast distances, but the exact details of how this extensive network was organized and operated before Petra's ascendancy remain frustratingly obscure. The known history of the Nabateans begins in earnest around the 4th century BC, but their origins and the early history of their trade routes remain shrouded in mystery. The absence of written documentation from this period is all the more striking when we consider the efficiency and sophistication with which the Nabateans ran their trade empire. The Nabatean kingdom, stretching from the Arabian desert to the Levant, was undeniably one of the ancient world's commercial powerhouses. Yet the lack of records from the pre-Petra era raises the question, where did they go? What we do know is that the Nabateans were master traders who capitalized on their strategic location, controlling the flow of goods from the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean world. Early archaeological findings suggest that their caravans plied ancient trade routes that linked Palestine, Egypt, and even parts of Mesopotamia. These routes were more than simple pathways. They were sophisticated systems that involved well-established trade networks, fortified cities, and a highly developed infrastructure. Yet, when the focus shifts to the era before Petra's rise, the written record goes dark. Historians have speculated that the loss of documentation could be due to the inherent nature of the Nabatean society. It's possible that the Nabateans, like many ancient cultures, did not initially place a high value on written records, preferring to rely on oral traditions and practical systems of trade. But this explanation seems unlikely when considering the vast and organized nature of their trade network, which surely required detailed accounting and official records to ensure that such an empire could function efficiently. Another theory posits that these early records were lost due to the deliberate actions of the Nabatean rulers themselves. It is not uncommon for political leaders to erase or suppress certain documents, especially if they contain sensitive information about trade practices, rivalries, or even disputes with neighboring kingdoms. But the sudden disappearance of all early records seems to suggest something far more enigmatic, perhaps an event or series of events that led to a complete break in the documentation process. The absence of records from the pre-Petra period is particularly curious, given the abundance of written materials that exist from the later phases of Nabatean history. Once Petra became the heart of the Nabatean kingdom in the 2nd century BC, there was a sudden influx of inscriptions, most notably in the form of monumental stelae and dedicatory inscriptions that provide valuable information about the kingdom's politics, religion, and trade. Yet, this shift in record-keeping seems to coincide with Petra's growth, suggesting that the early period before Petra may have operated under an entirely different system, one that perhaps did not prioritize written records as much as the later system did. Could there have been a technological or cultural shift that led to this transformation? Some scholars have proposed that the Nabateans, originally influenced by their nomadic lifestyle, may have gradually adopted a more urbanized and bureaucratic approach to governance as Petra became more established. The resulting need for written records to manage the expanding trade empire could explain the sudden surge in inscriptions. But what happened to the records from the earlier periods? Were they lost to time or deliberately destroyed? Another possibility lies in the very structure of Nabatean society. The Nabateans were known for their ability to adapt to various cultural influences, and their trade routes passed through a multitude of regions with different languages and customs. Perhaps their initial reliance on oral records and informal systems of trade simply did not result in the same kind of documented history that later civilizations left behind. This would mean that the records we have from the more famous phase of their empire may not have been as consistent or formal in the earlier years. Yet, if we look deeper into the archaeological evidence, something curious begins to emerge. While there are few written records from the pre-Petra era, the physical evidence of the trade routes themselves speaks volumes. Alongside the ancient caravanserais, temples, and fortifications, there are traces of goods that suggest a thriving network. Trade seals, inscriptions on pottery, and even ancient coins provide glimpses of the vast exchanges that took place long before Petra's zenith. But without written documents, these material remains leave many questions unanswered. How did the Nabateans organize their networks? Who were their primary trading partners? And why do the records of this period remain so elusive? Some fringe theories suggest that the records could have been lost during a period of upheaval or instability, perhaps during the transition from a more nomadic trading system to a more centralized, sedentary empire. Could the sudden abandonment of the earlier trade routes coincide with political or military conflict that led to the destruction of trade documentation? There is little evidence to support this theory, but the suggestion that the Nabateans were at odds with their neighboring kingdoms during these formative years is certainly not far-fetched. The competition for control over the lucrative spice trade and access to the Arabian Peninsula's resources would have been fierce, and it's conceivable that some records were destroyed in the midst of these power struggles. Then there's the more speculative theory that has intrigued some historians: the possibility of a lost or hidden archive. Could it be that the earliest Nabatean records were deliberately concealed or hidden, either for reasons of secrecy or protection from external threats? Such a theory, though speculative, highlights the ongoing mystery of the Nabateans and their enigmatic early history. The idea of an entire archive hidden away, perhaps buried beneath the shifting sands of the desert or lost to time, leaves a haunting sense of something still waiting to be discovered. But as the sands of time continue to erode the evidence, the mystery remains unsolved. The Nabatean pre-Petra trade routes remain an enigma, their documentation lost to the ages. What happened to the records that could have illuminated this forgotten chapter of history? Did the Nabateans purposely erase their past, or did time and circumstance simply conspire to erase it for them? These questions, and the absence of clear answers, leave us with a haunting thought. What else, hidden deep within the deserts of the ancient world, has yet to be uncovered? What other records, forgotten and buried beneath the weight of history, might still be waiting to tell their story? The ancient city of Ebla, located in modern-day Syria, was once a thriving center of commerce, diplomacy, and culture, its influence stretching far beyond its walled boundaries. The remains of this city, particularly from the period of its Second Kingdom phase around 2300 BC, reveal a sophisticated society, rich in material culture and administrative practices. However, amid the grandeur of Ebla's accomplishments, there lies a mystery that has confounded archaeologists and historians alike: the unexplained destruction layer that marks the abrupt end of Ebla's Second Kingdom phase. As we step onto the grounds of Ebla's archaeological site, we are greeted by the remnants of its ancient palace and administrative buildings, an imposing complex of brick walls, corridors, and courtyards, now reduced to rubble under the weight of millennia. This was once a city that held sway over the surrounding region, a center of trade and influence, with a written language and a wealth of archival documents. The city's significance is not just archaeological, but historical, for the Eblate tablets, discovered in the 1970s, provided scholars with an invaluable glimpse into the political, economic, and religious life of the ancient Near East. Yet, despite these remarkable finds, the destruction of Ebla's Second Kingdom phase remains one of its most puzzling mysteries. The destruction layer at Ebla's palace and surrounding buildings is unmistakable. Archaeologists have uncovered a layer of charred remains, shattered pottery, and collapsed structures, all pointing to a violent and sudden end to a once thriving urban center. But who or what was responsible for this destruction? The usual suspects, foreign invaders or internal revolt, are both plausible but remain largely unsubstantiated by the evidence at hand. Unlike other cities of the ancient world that fell to the armies of well-known conquerors, there is no clear indication of who or what caused Ebla's abrupt collapse. The evidence is strangely silent, leaving behind only the remnants of a city that was, at the time, a major political and economic power. What makes this destruction even more intriguing is that, despite the violent end of the Second Kingdom phase, there are no records, either in the form of written texts or monumental inscriptions, that directly describe the event. In a world where documentation was essential for political and administrative purposes, the absence of any reference to the city's fall is striking. Could the destruction of Ebla have been so catastrophic that the memory of it was deliberately erased? Or was it simply a case of the city's downfall occurring so quickly that no one had the chance to record it? The lack of written records is particularly curious when we consider the level of documentation that Ebla had achieved. The Eblaite tablets, which were discovered in large numbers at the site, are an extraordinary treasure trove of ancient information. Written in a cuneiform script similar to that of Mesopotamia, these tablets provide detailed accounts of Ebla's internal affairs, its diplomatic relations with other city-states, and its commercial exchanges with distant lands. They also reveal a society that valued record-keeping, with a well-organized bureaucracy capable of managing everything from trade agreements to religious offerings. However, despite this wealth of documentation, there are no tablets or inscriptions that detail the fall of Ebla's Second Kingdom. This absence is particularly jarring when considering that other ancient cities, such as Ur and Mari, which also experienced dramatic declines, left behind accounts of their destruction, often in the form of royal inscriptions or chronicles. The lack of such records for Ebla suggests that something about the city's fall was different, perhaps even unique. One theory put forward by some scholars is that the destruction of Ebla's Second Kingdom was not the result of a foreign invasion, but rather the consequence of internal strife. The evidence for this, however, is scant. While Ebla's political structure appears to have been relatively stable at the time, with a strong central administration, it is possible that power struggles within the elite or among different factions led to the city's downfall. This theory is supported by the fact that the city's archives, though extensive, were often centered around the palace and royal administration. If these elites were overthrown or displaced, it would explain the sudden cessation of activity and the destruction of the palace, yet no conclusive evidence of an internal revolt has been uncovered. Another possibility is that the city's fall was tied to the changing geopolitical landscape of the region. During the height of Ebla's power, the city maintained diplomatic ties with several important Mesopotamian and Levantine powers, including the Akkadian Empire and the Amorite kingdoms. However, as the political climate shifted, it is conceivable that the region's power dynamics changed rapidly, leading to a sudden collapse of Ebla's commercial and political networks. If such a collapse occurred, the city may have been abandoned or destroyed by those who once relied on it, either out of shifting allegiances or economic necessity. Yet, the absence of any direct reference to these events raises an even more intriguing possibility. Could the destruction of Ebla have been the result of a natural disaster? Earthquakes, floods, or other environmental factors could have caused the sudden and dramatic collapse of the city. Some researchers have suggested that the Ebla site shows evidence of seismic activity, with some structures appearing to have collapsed from tremors. While this theory remains speculative, it is not entirely outside the realm of possibility. Ancient cities, particularly those in earthquake-prone regions, often met their end due to natural disasters that were not always recorded by contemporary writers. Despite these theories, the true cause of Ebla's fall remains elusive. The absence of clear evidence linking the destruction to any one cause, whether internal revolt, foreign invasion, or natural disaster, means that we are left with more questions than answers. Why was Ebla, a city that had flourished for centuries, destroyed so suddenly and without explanation? What happened to the people who once inhabited its streets, its palaces, and its markets? Did they simply vanish, or did they disperse to other parts of the ancient world? And why did the written records of this event vanish along with the city itself? As we explore this enigmatic chapter in history, we are reminded of the fragility of ancient civilizations. Empires and cities rise to great heights, only to be brought low by forces both seen and unseen. The case of Ebla, with its unexplained destruction and the disappearance of its written documentation, serves as a haunting reminder of how little we truly know about the forces that shaped the ancient world. What secrets, hidden beneath the ruins of Ebla's palace, might still lie buried in the sands of time? Perhaps the true story of Ebla's fall is one that remains locked in the earth, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Until then, the city's silence remains, leaving us to wonder what really happened during that fateful moment in the Second Kingdom phase. And as we move forward in our exploration of ancient mysteries, the shadow of Ebla's forgotten past continues to loom large, urging us to question what lies just beyond the reach of our understanding. One key aspect that continues to perplex researchers is the complete absence of written records concerning Ebla's demise. Cities of such importance typically left behind traces, be they diplomatic correspondence, military reports, or accounts of royal succession. Yet Ebla's silence suggests that whatever occurred was either so rapid or so devastating that it erased not only the city's material wealth, but also its historical narrative. The lack of documentation might indicate that the city's collapse was not just an isolated event, but part of a larger and more chaotic shift in the regional balance of power. Perhaps the very networks that Ebla once relied upon for trade and diplomacy crumbled, leaving the city isolated and vulnerable, with no one left to chronicle its final days. The absence of written records raises another question. How much of ancient history is lost to time? The case of Ebla reveals just how much information can be lost, not through the erosion of artifacts or ruins, but through the absence of records that could provide essential context. Were the people of Ebla simply swept away by forces beyond their control, or did their downfall occur in a manner that the surviving civilizations found too shameful or inconvenient to record? We may never know the full story of Ebla's fall, but the enigma it presents forces us to acknowledge that much of the ancient world remains hidden beneath layers of time, silent and forgotten, waiting to be uncovered, or perhaps never to be fully understood. Ultimately, the mystery of Ebla's disappearance emphasizes the vulnerability of civilizations to forces that are often beyond their control, whether they be political, environmental, or social. The echoes of Ebla's rise and fall remind us that history is not a linear progression, but a tapestry of triumphs, disasters, and forgotten chapters. As we continue to study ancient civilizations, we must accept that some of their most profound mysteries may never be solved, leaving us with the haunting realization that history is, in many ways. As we venture into the mist-shrouded hills of Central Europe, where the early Celtic tribes once thrived, we encounter a strange and unsettling silence. The Hallstatt culture, named after the site of Hallstatt in modern-day Austria, flourished between roughly 800 and 500 BC. This civilization left behind extraordinary evidence of its power and influence: immense burial mounds, elaborate grave goods, and sophisticated fortified settlements. Yet, within the archaeological record, there is a curious gap, an abrupt disappearance of many of the elite centers associated with the Hallstatt culture, without any clear evidence of conflict or upheaval. Imagine standing on the edge of a hill, gazing down at the remains of a once thriving settlement. Stone walls, crumbling now under the weight of centuries, once formed the strongholds of the Celtic elite. These centers were not just places of habitation. They were the seats of power, trade, and ritual, where chieftains and warriors once held sway over their people. Some of the most prominent sites, such as Heuneberg in southern Germany or the hill forts in the Bohemian region of the Czech Republic, stood as monumental testaments to the Hallstatt society's reach and organization. What's puzzling, though, is the sudden and unexplained abandonment of these elite centers around 500 BC. Unlike other ancient cultures that saw the collapse of their settlements through invasions, uprisings, or environmental disasters, the disappearance of the Hallstatt elite settlements is notably peculiar. There is no sign of violent destruction, no evidence of an external force, nor any recorded conflict that might explain why these centers were abandoned. And yet, by the early 5th century BC, the once flourishing Hallstatt culture had transitioned into the Latin culture, which, although still Celtic in nature, saw a shift in the focus of its settlements, with many of the elite centers in Hallstatt disappearing altogether. This raises the question: what happened to the elite centers of Hallstatt? Why were they suddenly abandoned? Did the people simply move on to new locations? Or was there something more at play, a hidden factor we have yet to understand? The archaeological evidence from the Hallstatt period speaks of a society of considerable sophistication. The elite class was buried with grave goods of extraordinary craftsmanship, such as bronze chariots, swords, and ornate jewelry, all suggesting a high level of social stratification. Some of the best preserved burials include those at the famed prince's tomb at Hochdorf, Germany, where an entire chariot and the remains of a warrior prince were laid to rest, surrounded by a wealth of golden artifacts. Such finds indicate that these elite centers were not merely for administrative or defensive purposes. They were cultural hubs, reflecting the wealth and status of the Celtic aristocracy. Yet, when we look at the remains of these once thriving sites, we see no signs of an external threat, no evidence of warfare, no mass graves of fallen soldiers, no traces of invading forces. In fact, some of the settlements seem to have been abandoned with unsettling suddenness. At Heuneberg, for instance, the fortifications were abandoned, but the site shows no signs of destruction. The buildings remain intact, but there's a distinct absence of people, no signs of any forced evacuation or violent confrontation. Similarly, at the site of the Hallstatt cemetery, which once contained hundreds of graves, the excavation reveals that around the mid-5th century BC, burial activity suddenly stopped. But why? Why did the elite class, who had once clearly enjoyed immense power, cease to be buried in these ceremonial centers? Some historians and archaeologists have suggested that the disappearance of these centers may have been tied to the socio-political changes occurring within Hallstatt society itself. Perhaps, as the social structures shifted and the power of the elites began to wane, there was a conscious decision to abandon the old centers in favor of new, more strategically advantageous locations. The rise of the Latin culture, with its more dispersed settlements and an increased focus on hill forts, may have been part of a larger cultural transformation, marking a shift away from centralized power and the traditional hierarchy of the Hallstatt elite. But what caused this shift? Why did the people of Hallstatt, at the height of their civilization, turn away from the very places that had served as the heart of their society? The reasons remain elusive. There is also the possibility that the elites of Hallstatt may have faced an internal crisis, perhaps a breakdown in their social order or a loss of faith in the traditional structures of power. Evidence from other contemporary cultures suggests that complex societies often experience profound transformations due to internal unrest or ideological shifts. Could the abandonment of the elite centers have been an expression of disillusionment, a symbolic rejection of the very institutions that had once held society together? Another theory posits that environmental factors could have played a role in the sudden abandonment of these settlements. The Hallstatt period corresponds to a time of significant climatic changes in Europe. Evidence from tree rings and sediment cores suggests that the region experienced a period of colder and wetter weather during the late 6th and early 5th centuries BC, which could have negatively impacted agriculture and trade. If the Hallstatt elites relied heavily on agricultural surplus and long-distance trade for their wealth, a sudden drop in resources might have prompted them to abandon their urban centers in search of more fertile or secure areas. However, this theory raises more questions than it answers. Why would an entire elite class abandon well-established centers of power simply due to environmental factors? And why was there no corresponding evidence of widespread migration or population decline? Could it be that the collapse of these centers was not due to external pressures, but instead due to a gradual withdrawal from traditional forms of governance, as the Celtic elite sought new avenues for expression or control? There is, of course, the possibility that we are missing something. The abruptness of the transition from Hallstatt to Latin culture suggests that there may have been forces at work that we simply cannot yet fully comprehend. Perhaps the disappearance of the elite centers was tied to a larger cultural or spiritual shift, one that we have not yet uncovered in the archaeological record. Some scholars have even speculated that there may have been ritual or religious factors that led to the abandonment of the settlements, as the elites sought new forms of spiritual expression or leadership. What is perhaps most intriguing about the disappearance of these centers is the complete lack of any direct evidence for their decline. Most ancient cultures, when faced with the collapse of their urban centers, left behind some record, whether in the form of inscriptions, oral histories, or even physical destruction. Yet, in the case of the Hallstatt elites, there is a curious absence of such records. No inscriptions have been found that explain the disappearance of these centers, no ancient texts that tell the story of their decline. The people of Hallstatt seem to have left no clear message behind, as if the very records of their once great civilization simply vanished, erased from history. Perhaps, in the end, this is the true mystery of the Hallstatt culture, not the collapse of its political structures or the disappearance of its elite centers, but the silence that followed. Why did these centers, which had once been the heart of Celtic power, fade so suddenly and without a trace? What caused the people who once filled these fortified settlements to simply disappear from the historical record? As we continue our exploration into the lost civilizations of the past, the enigmatic disappearance of the Hallstatt elite centers remains one of the most unsettling mysteries of ancient Europe. Were they abandoned willingly, or did something more sinister force the people to leave? Until we uncover more answers, the legacy of these vanishing cultures will remain shrouded in the mists of time, challenging us to look deeper into the forces that shape the rise and fall of civilizations. What other secrets might still be buried in the earth, waiting to be discovered? As we move further into the heart of ancient Africa, we step into a world that is both vast and enigmatic. Beneath the dusty sands and dense jungles, there lies a history that we are only beginning to understand. This history is not one of civilizations with the grandiose monuments of Egypt or the sprawling cities of Mesopotamia. Instead, it is a story of kings and queens, warriors and diplomats, whose deeds have been largely lost to time. Today, we turn our attention to the Kushite campaigns, a series of military expeditions that took place deep into the heart of Central Africa during the reigns of the Kushite pharaohs. But there is one perplexing problem. The records of these campaigns have seemingly vanished. Imagine for a moment the land of Kush, the kingdom of Kush, located in what is now Sudan. To the north, the mighty Nile River flows through ancient Egypt, a civilization famous for its monumental achievements. To the south, however, the Kushites thrived in their own unique culture, with their capital at Napata and later at Meroe, The Kushite kings, known for their remarkable prowess as warriors, governed an empire that stretched beyond the borders of modern-day Sudan. The Kingdom of Kush, at its height, controlled vast swaths of territory in both Nubia and beyond. The Kushites, at times, even ruled Egypt, their pharaohs known as the Black Pharaohs. In the 8th and 7th centuries BC, the Kushite kings embarked on a series of military campaigns into the heart of Central Africa, far deeper into the continent than Egypt had ever ventured. Their motivations are not entirely clear. Some scholars suggest these were campaigns of conquest, while others propose they were diplomatic missions aimed at securing resources or trade routes. Regardless, these expeditions left behind few traces. Despite the extensive archaeological and historical records left by the Kushites in Egypt and Nubia, there is a significant gap when it comes to the documentation of their campaigns in the heart of Africa. What happened to the records of these expeditions? Where did they go? Why is there no definitive historical account that describes the Kushites' encounters with the peoples of Central Africa, their struggles, or their triumphs? The absence of detailed records is particularly curious considering the Kushites' reputation as skilled military strategists, adept at both warfare and diplomacy. These were not the actions of a culture that would simply forget or erase such pivotal moments in their history. And yet, no grand royal inscriptions or stone tablets have been discovered to detail these southern campaigns. Why? The historical context of the Kingdom of Kush is essential to understanding the mystery of their lost records. The Kushites rose to prominence after the fall of the Egyptian Middle Kingdom, establishing their power base along the Nile's first cataract. From here they expanded southward, into the harsh desert of Nubia and the fertile lands of what is now Sudan. Over time, their rulers became known as the Kings of the South and gained influence over Egypt, ultimately founding the 25th dynasty, the so-called Kushite dynasty. Pharaoh Pi, the first of the great Kushite rulers of Egypt, successfully consolidated his rule over both Egypt and Nubia. However, the most intriguing chapter of their history is perhaps their military activity in Central Africa, particularly during the reign of the powerful King Taharqa, who ruled from approximately 690 BC to 664 BC. Taharqa was a warrior king with ambitions that stretched far beyond the boundaries of Nubia and Egypt. He led his armies deep into the lands to the south of the Kingdom of Kush, extending his power into regions that were largely unknown to the Egyptians. He is believed to have campaigned in the areas around the Sudanese hills, and some scholars even suggest that he may have ventured as far as the Congo Basin, although the evidence remains inconclusive. Yet, despite the strategic importance of these campaigns, we are left with an almost complete lack of written records. What is even more perplexing is that Taharqa himself was a prolific builder and patron of the arts. His legacy, it would seem, would have demanded a record. The surviving documents from his reign mostly concern his military exploits in Egypt, where he battled the Assyrians for control. His inscriptions in Egypt are numerous, detailing his victories, his royal decrees, and his status as a divinely chosen ruler. But once the Kushite king turned his attention to Central Africa, the records grow sparse. One theory is that the Kushites' efforts in Central Africa were not as militaristic as some believe. Instead, these expeditions may have been part of a broader diplomatic mission aimed at forging alliances with powerful African kingdoms further south. Perhaps these kingdoms, such as the ancient peoples of the Congo, already had powerful military and political systems that made warfare less necessary. If this were the case, the Kushites' southern expeditions could have been peaceful missions, an attempt to foster relationships and ensure trade routes, rather than brutal conquests. But if diplomacy and trade were the true motivations behind these ventures, why are there no surviving accounts of them? The lack of written records would seem to suggest that something else may have been at play. Could it be that the Kushites themselves chose to keep their southern campaigns secret? Did they leave no records deliberately, perhaps to avoid stirring unrest in the conquered regions? Some scholars have speculated that these missions were so clandestine that they were intentionally left out of the official annals, a strategic silence meant to preserve Kushite dominance. Another theory suggests that the records of these southern campaigns may have existed at one point, only to be lost in the turmoil of history. The kingdom of Kush, like many ancient civilizations, was subject to invasions and internal upheaval. In the 6th century BC, the Assyrians, under the leadership of Esarhaddon, invaded Egypt, pushing the Kushites out. Following this defeat, the Kushites retreated back into Nubia, and the once flourishing kingdom of Napata began to lose its prominence. Did these invasions lead to the destruction of the royal archives, including the records of the southern campaigns? If the Kushites were forced to abandon their capital or flee to safer territories, could the documentation of their campaigns have been lost in the chaos? Despite all the evidence of Kushite power, the absence of written records of their southern expeditions is a mystery that still baffles historians and archaeologists. The kingdom of Kush left behind an impressive legacy in the form of monumental structures, royal tombs, and intricate artworks. Yet the story of their campaigns into Central Africa remains frustratingly elusive. Did the Kushites leave no record of their southern campaigns simply because they wanted to keep them secret? Or were the records lost in the ravages of time, only to be buried beneath the sands of the desert or lost in the thick jungles of Central Africa? In the end, the mystery of the Kushite campaigns into Central Africa raises more questions than answers. Were these military expeditions truly as extensive as some suggest, or were they part of a broader diplomatic and trade initiative that simply didn't leave behind a paper trail? Could the records of these campaigns have been deliberately erased, or were they lost to the ravages of time and conflict? What we do know is that the kingdom of Kush was once a mighty force in ancient Africa, a kingdom that, at its peak, wielded great power. But without the records of these southern campaigns, the full story of the Kushites remains forever incomplete. As we continue our exploration into the mysteries of ancient Africa, we are left to wonder, what other secrets lie hidden in the lost records of the Kushite kings? And what stories, untold and forgotten, still wait to be uncovered?